Part 1 of Hogwarts. Don't starve in the Forbidden Forest. If you dare walk out that door, don't you ever come back. I don't have any legal adoption papers for you anyway. Vernon Dursley dropped the TV remote and shouted at the thin figure standing in the hallway. Kane Heath stood by the entrance. After finishing putting on his shoes, he turned to look at Vernon and Petunia Dursley, who was busy in the kitchen. In any case, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley, I am grateful that the two of you provided me with a place to stay for this past month without asking for anything in return. Please rest assured, I won't be coming back. When Harry and Dudley return later, please say goodbye to them for me. After speaking, Kane pushed open the door and left the Dursley house, stepping onto the sidewalk of Privet Drive. In the afternoon streetscape, the shadows slowly coalesced into a tall, elegant man that only Kane could see. The man raised an eyebrow and said, "Kane, you don't look very well right now. If it weren't for you, Maxwell, I wouldn't be doing this poorly. Do you have something to say?" Kane glanced at the man only he could see, the king of the constant, hailing from that world of famine. "Of course I do," Maxwell said. "Find something to eat before dark." "Thanks. I'll just rummage through the trash cans alone at night," Kane said gloomily. "What I mean is, you're only 11 years old. Can't you find a more dignified way to live?" Maxwell replied, his tone equally dark. "If you're trying to convince me to accept the shadows of the constant and let them haunt me, please keep your mouth shut." "I worked hard to escape that place," Kane said coldly. "Ah," Maxwell sighed. "Kane, oh Kane, you were so naive. From the moment you stepped into the constant, you were marked by them. It doesn't matter if you escaped. The only reason you haven't seen them is because I've been blocking them for you. But now, I think it's time for you to take that step yourself." Kane looked up at Maxwell. "So, the advice remains the same, find something to eat before dark." As Maxwell spoke, he reached into the shadow beneath Kane's feet and pulled out a shadow shaped like a lock, smiling. In an instant, Kane felt as if he had been reconnected to something terrifying. The shadows that had been suppressed erupted from within him, flooding into his own shadow before he quickly forced them back under control. "It's time to embrace our true nature, Kane. Farewell." With a bang, Maxwell vanished. Kane turned around and looked at his shadow, which was beginning to claw and writhe. He frowned and clicked his tongue. "Behave yourself." The shadow shuddered and immediately became submissive. At dusk, Harry and Dudley walked into the Dursley home. Dudley headed straight for the kitchen, ransacking the fridge before finally pulling out a bottle of cold cola and chugging it. Harry, meanwhile, carefully brushed the dust off his clothes. He grabbed the mop from his bedroom under the stairs and wiped away the footprints Dudley had left on the floor. After finishing, he cautiously poured himself a glass of water, drinking as quietly as possible, and began searching the ground floor for a certain figure. Unfortunately, he couldn't find him. "Uncle Vernon, where is Kane?" Harry asked slowly but firmly, walking up to Vernon Dursley, who was reading the newspaper. "Ran away," Vernon said, flipping a page. Harry frowned. "You kicked him out. Why?" Vernon angrily crumpled the newspaper and threw it into the fireplace. "I didn't take you two in just to be questioned. I didn't kick Kane Heath out, he chose to leave on his own." Harry dropped his timid act. "So you just let him leave? He has no money, he hasn't had dinner, and you aren't going to look for him." "We never adopted him anyway," Vernon snorted, picking up the remote to watch TV. Dudley came charging over then, hitting Harry with the force of a locomotive and nearly knocking him into the fireplace. "Isn't it good that Kane's gone? Our house isn't an orphanage." Dudley sat in his father's lap, the poor sofa groaned under a weight its designers had never anticipated. Petunia came downstairs just then and stood by the staircase. "No need to worry about him. Mrs. Fig said he's over on Plum Cross Street performing magic tricks. He'll come back when his stomach starts growling." Vernon snorted again. "HMPH. He lived here for over a month and never performed a single trick for us. What an ungrateful brat." Hearing that Kane was at Plum Cross Street, Harry didn't say another word and headed for the door to put on his shoes. Seeing this, Vernon felt his authority being challenged. "If you dare go out today, don't you come back either." Harry didn't back down an inch. "I'm not like Kane. You are my legal guardians." If you don't come looking for me, the police will come looking for you." With that, Harry bolted out the door, leaving Vernon Dursley fuming in impotent rage on the sofa. Soon, Harry reached Plum Cross Street and saw Kane standing on the corner, surrounded by several young girls. Kane was standing on his tiptoes, placing a pitch-black hat onto the head of one of the girls. He then lifted the hat. As it rose, the girl's loose hair was swept up by the motion. Miraculously, her hair had been styled into a youthful, cute bun held by a hairpin. The girl's friends gasped in amazement. The girl herself pulled out a mirror, looked at her new hairstyle, and in her excitement, hugged Kane and planted a kiss on his cheek. She then took a 10-pound note from her purse and dropped it into Kane's hat. "Thank you, my elegant little magician," she said, stepping back slightly to let her friends have a turn. Just as another girl excitedly crouched down in front of Kane, he spotted Harry Potter standing nearby. He looked apologetic. "I'm sorry, but I think special magic should only be given to special people, don't you? I think you just think Emily is prettier than us, which is why you only did it for her. But we've been waiting here so long, you owe us a consolation prize," the girl crouching before him said, resting her chin on her hand with a playful pout. Kane looked at the approaching Harry and sighed. "Of course, there's a consolation." Kane extended a hand, the back of it facing the light of a nearby street lamp while the shadows in his palm twisted slowly. With a swift flick of his wrist, 3 jet black roses appeared in his hand. He gave one to each of the 3 girls, then pulled his hat low and immediately walked away toward the unlit areas of the street. What a cute little guy. Is it just me, or does it feel like he's avoiding us?" Emily asked, holding her black rose. "No, he's avoiding me." Harry's voice came from behind them as he sprinted past the 3 girls. Harry sprinted toward the alleyway where Kane had disappeared. Kane, seeing Harry running his way, knew exactly what he wanted: to drag him back to the Dursleys. In Kane's heart, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley weren't truly evil people. After all, they had taken him in when he first transmigrated to this world, providing for him for an entire month without asking for anything in return. Regardless of the fact that he lived in a cupboard under the stairs, it was a roof over his head, and he was genuinely grateful. However, gratitude was one thing, living with them was another. The Dursleys had a talent for mental violence that felt like it could shave years off a person's life. Harry had a supernatural gift for enduring it, Kane did not. Harry burst into the alley. Kane was hiding behind a derelict car, watching Harry's reflection in the side mirror. With a flick of his mind, the shadows already merged with the alley floor twisted into several, decidedly uncute, shadow hounds. They lunged out of the darkness, barking silently but menacingly at Harry. Harry frowned, picking up an iron pipe from the ground to bolster his courage. "Kane, come out. Let's go back. Uncle Vernon was just talking out of anger." Aunt Petunia even asked Mrs. Fig where you were. "If you go back now, they'll both choose to have selective amnesia about this." Kane sighed and stepped out from behind the car. "The more likely scenario is them mocking me for the rest of my life. I don't enjoy that feeling." Harry looked helpless. "It's just some nagging and yelling. At least you get fed every day and have a dry place to sleep." Kane didn't budge. "This isn't bad either. So what if I have to deal with the elements and skipped meals? At least no one is committing psychological warfare against me." For the first time, Harry felt the urge to say the words he usually heard from adults: "Can't you be a bit more mature?" Kane shook his head. "I've been mature. Maturity taught me that being grown up brings 0 mental health benefits. For the sake of a little material comfort, I really can't stand letting my fragile spirit dance on the edge of a blade. So, Harry, go home and eat. Otherwise, Dudley might finish your portion too." Harry shook his head vehemently. "You're coming back with me." Kane sighed. If bribery and logic failed, he'd have to use a little force. "If you don't leave, these 2 things might actually bite," Kane said. He commanded the shadow beasts to charge. He had no intention of hurting Harry, he simply used the shadows to shroud Harry's vision, blinding him temporarily. "All right, go home, Harry. Just go home," Kane murmured, walking toward Harry to guide him out of the alley. Harry panicked for a split second when his vision went dark, but he quickly realized this was Kane's doing. He had long suspected Kane was different, much like himself. Harry had once made a pane of glass vanish and had fallen from heights without a scratch. Previously, the only odd thing about Kane was his shadow, which sometimes writhed like a living thing before snapping back to normal. This was the first time Harry truly felt the weight of Kane's magic. Once he realized it was just Kane, he wasn't afraid. He lunged forward, grabbing the hand on his shoulder, determined to drag Kane out of the alley. "Harry, you really are stubborn," Kane muttered. He manipulated the eerie shadow claws, mimicking the resistance of his own body as Harry slowly dragged him toward the street. Eventually, Harry's vision cleared. He felt the Kane behind him stop struggling, his strength fading. Harry breathed a sigh of relief and looked back. There was no Kane. The hand he had been gripping so tightly was nothing but a mass of pitch-black shadow. Now, that shadow abruptly dissolved. Well, it didn't disappear entirely. The shadow morphed into a mouth and spoke with Kane's voice. "Bye-bye, Harry. I have a place to go. Sayonara." Harry bared his teeth. "Can't you just speak English?" The moment the words left his mouth, the last of Kane's shadow vanished with a soft pop. "Fine, fine," Harry hissed, looking at the empty alley. "Pray I don't find you, you evil shadow brat." "I'll definitely." He paused, then muttered, "If I can beat you by then, I'll definitely make you regret this." Kane had no idea he had just topped Harry's must settle scores list. He had arrived at a dilapidated, somewhat shady motel. Reputable places had safety, disreputable places had the benefit of not asking an 11-year-old for an ID. To avoid drawing the owner's greed, Kane had hidden most of his earnings from the magic show in secret pockets sewn into his clothes. He kept only a small amount of loose change in his main pocket, looking every bit the penniless street urchin to prevent any nightly visits from a greedy landlord. "Boss, how long will this get me?" At the counter, Kane dumped a mess of crumpled notes and coins. The owner took one look and calculated the value. "About 2 days. Private bath, no meals." Kane did the math. £50 for 2 days, about the standard rate for a place like this. He took the key and found his room. It wasn't bad, small but not cramped. After a quick wash, he collapsed onto the bed. He was exhausted and needed sleep. Back at the Dursley house, a dejected Harry opened the door and took off his shoes. Vernon, watching TV, grumbled without turning around, "Food's in the kitchen. Eat and get to bed." He immediately turned off the TV, as if allowing Harry or Kane a moment of entertainment was a sin. Kane didn't come back. "It's just me," Harry said quietly. Vernon froze halfway up the stairs. "Didn't come back. Where is he?" Harry lowered his head, until his nose nearly touched his plate. "I don't know." Vernon scowled, then snorted. "Let him freeze for a night. He'll be back tomorrow with his tail between his legs. Throw his portion in the bin." He stomped upstairs. Harry looked at the plate that should have been Kane's. Angry and frustrated, he pulled the plate over and began stabbing the food violently. He shoved it into his mouth as if the sausages were Kane's own flesh, chewing with unnecessary aggression. Then, with a sharp crunch, he bit his tongue. Tears and blood welled up simultaneously. Whether it was the pain or something else, he couldn't tell. After finishing, Harry lay in his dark cupboard, his breath trembling. He looked at the low ceiling, and listened to the sounds of laughter from upstairs, laughter that held not a hint of sadness. In that moment, he realized exactly why Kane would rather suffer outside than come back. In the motel, Kane was sleeping soundly until a strange, sharp prick of cold startled him. He snapped his eyes open. "It's Charlie," he whispered. The moment Kane realized what was attacking him, he slapped the switch on the bedside lamp. The room instantly flooded with light. He had hoped the brightness would disperse the shadows, but reality defied his expectations. It did nothing. Instead, it allowed him to see his attackers clearly, twisted, deformed black tentacles erupting from every nook and cranny where the light couldn't quite reach. "What is going on?" Kane asked, teeth gritted as he fought to maintain his sanity. He knew Maxwell was listening. With a soft thud, Maxwell appeared, perched casually on the windowsill. When you gaze into the abyss gazes back into you. You chose to use the shadows in the physical world, so naturally, ahem. I know. All that. Get to the point, please. Why isn't the light working? Kane manipulated his own shadows, desperately parrying the other dark appendages. But as his shadow tentacles were snapped and dragged away one by one, he felt a wave of profound exhaustion washing over him. You're trying to drive away the shadows of the constant with a common light bulb from the physical world. Quite the ego you have, Maxwell said succinctly. You need light that shares the same source as the shadows. The same source. Kane frowned as an idea struck. He condensed a ball of shadow in his hand, then forced it to ignite. A flicker of dark blue flame roared to life. As soon as this eerie light appeared, the invading tentacles recoiled into the corners, vanishing instantly. Be grateful. I've helped you survive your first night outside the nest, Maxwell said before vanishing once more. Yeah, thanks. Kane leaned against the headboard, clutching the shadow flame to his chest. Finally, he drifted into a fitful sleep. The next morning, Kane woke up feeling like he'd been run over by a truck. He extinguished the shadow flame that had burned all night. It hadn't consumed fuel so much as it had consumed him. Burning it for hours had left his skin pale, his eyes sunken with dark circles, and his energy completely drained. Maxwell, you still there? Present. Maxwell was already lying on the bed, hands tucked behind his head, looking perfectly relaxed. How do I recover? Kane asked bluntly. Eat something. Or wait until tonight and try to tear the shadows of the constant apart when they come for you. What you rip off becomes yours. How much you can take depends on your skill, Maxwell replied. Thanks for nothing, Kane muttered. He tiredly left the room, locked the door, and exited the motel. He found a street stall and spent a few coins on 2 hot dogs, asking the vendor to go heavy on the sauce. Corn syrup and processed meat were total calorie bombs, but right now, that was exactly what Kane needed. With the food in his stomach, he felt a bit more human. The shadow on the ground grew slightly darker and more substantial. It wasn't much, but it would suffice. With a casual wave, the shadow coalesced into a black top hat. It was time for today's performance. At the same time, in a large briefing room at the Ministry of Magic, officials from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes had been dragged into an emergency meeting because of Kane. Kingsley Shacklebolt strode in. He had already obtained the data from the improper use of magic office regarding several high-energy magical spikes in London yesterday. With a flick of his wand, he projected a glowing 3D map of London into the air. Kingsley pointed to Plum Cross Street in Little Whinging. Yesterday at 6 p.m., a low-intensity dark magic fluctuation lasted for an hour at this location. His finger moved to a nearby alley. At 7:12 p.m., a brief spike of medium to high-intensity dark magic occurred here. Finally, he pointed to the rundown motel where Kane was staying. Starting at midnight, a high-intensity burst of dark magic erupted at this motel, lasting 12 seconds. It was followed by sustained low-intensity fluctuations until sunrise. Sounds like some sort of bizarre dark arts experiment, John Dawlish said, crossing his arms. That's why we didn't charge in yesterday but called this meeting instead, Kingsley explained. The fluctuations were incredibly pure and unmistakably from a single source. Given the intensity of the midnight experiment, a reckless approach could have resulted in a total wipeout of an Auror squad. So, does this meeting have a purpose other than telling us this dark wizard is dangerous? A witch with hair that kept changing colors asked slowly. Of course. You didn't think I called this meeting just for you, did you? I went to get reinforcements. Kingsley shrugged and looked toward the back of the room. A silver-haired figure had appeared, Albus Dumbledore. He was smiling at everyone in the room, most of whom had once been his students. The room instantly buzzed with hushed, respectful whispers. Suddenly, a junior clerk from the monitoring office burst in, breathless. The dark magic. It started again. At Swan Cross Street. Kingsley's expression darkened. Swan Cross Street was the busiest intersection in Little Whinging. If a mysterious dark wizard started something there, the casualties, and the subsequent memory-wiping logistics, would be a nightmare. Kingsley looked at Dumbledore. Albus, we need to move. Indeed. Please, come close. I would have Fawkes take us, but apparition is faster. Dumbledore stepped forward and placed a hand on Kingsley's shoulder. Swan Cross Street. Kane was currently using his hairpin in the hat trick to charm two wealthy socialites. If things went according to plan, these two women, who had just stepped out of a stretch Cadillac, would tip him enough to cover half a month's rent. But as everyone knows, things rarely go according to plan. In a nearby alley, Dumbledore and Kingsley materialized. They were immediately hit by the heavy, oppressive aura of dark magic. "This is going to be a tough one," Kingsley muttered, rubbing his wand to psych himself up. Dumbledore was equally serious, discreetly drawing the Elder Wand. The two of them rounded the corner, prepared for a legendary confrontation with the source of the darkness. Only to find a small child working himself to the bone trying to make two rich ladies laugh. Quote. Quote question mark. Dumbledore sighed softly. Truly, appearances can be deceiving. Kingsley nodded in solemn agreement. Albus, is it really possible that such intense dark magic fluctuations are coming from that child? Dumbledore glanced at him. Unless there is an invisible Dark Lord standing behind him, yes. Is there a problem? Kingsley's expression turned grave. A significant one. If he were an adult wizard, he'd be headed straight for Azkaban. If he were a student at Hogwarts, his wand would be snapped. But the fact that even you don't recognize him suggests he hasn't been registered. The Ministry has no protocols for punishing or containing a child of this nature. You forget one thing, Kingsley. Hogwarts is exactly the place for such cases. I suspect the boy's acceptance letter is already sitting on Minerva's desk, awaiting a signature, Dumbledore said. For now, our mission is simply to investigate this young gentleman and his extraordinary affinity for the dark arts. With a gentle smile, Dumbledore led Kingsley toward Kane. I believe a good boy who uses dark magic to perform tricks for socialites wouldn't refuse to perform for an old man, would he? If Kane had heard Dumbledore, he might have considered it. But he didn't hear the headmaster, he heard Maxwell. Two wizards have eyes on you. Kane stiffened. He looked up and immediately saw Dumbledore and Kingsley, two men dressed in eccentric robes, holding wooden sticks, practically screaming, "I am a wizard," to the world. Fortunately, his efficiency today had been high. The two socialites had generously tipped him a full £100. With the cash in hand, his immediate instinct was to pack up and vanish. Kane hurried away, leaving the two ladies bewildered. They soon saw the strangely dressed men pursuing the boy. Feeling a surge of justice for the charming little magician, who had just made their day, the women moved to intercept Dumbledore and his companion. However, Kingsley gave his wand a subtle flick. The two ladies instantly became dazed and wandered back to their car, their memories of the interference already blurring. Maxwell, are they still behind me? Kane ducked into an alley. Yesterday, Harry was just an untrained kid he could brush off. Today, these two, one in his prime, the other a silver-haired elder, looked terrifyingly powerful. He needed to avoid a direct confrontation at all costs. But he soon realized Maxwell's scouting was unnecessary. Dumbledore and Kingsley were already standing right in front of him. "Young man, would you be interested in performing a trick for us?" "I saw your work back at the intersection," Dumbledore asked warmly. Kane sighed inwardly. He took off his hat. "Certainly. Please, hold this hat with both hands." Dumbledore followed the instructions. The moment his fingers touched the fabric, he felt its true nature. Ice cold, bone-chilling, and saturated with an incredibly sinister dark magic. Even a wizard who had practiced the dark arts for 80 years might not possess energy this pure. For an 11-year-old, was he a natural-born conduit for the shadows? While Dumbledore reflected, Kane was busy executing his escape. Since these two had essentially outed themselves as wizards, he didn't need to hide his cards. He willed his own shadow to manifest a second black top hat, which crawled up his leg and into his hand. He handed it to Kingsley. "And you as well, sir." Kingsley looked at Dumbledore, received a nod, and took the hat. "Now, please press the openings of the hats together. Get ready to witness a miracle," Kane said with an air of mystery. Dumbledore and Kingsley cooperatively pressed the hats together. When they looked up again, they saw nothing but Kane's back as he sprinted away at top speed. The hats in their hands dissolved into a tangled mess of shadow chains, locking their wrists together. One end of the chain even rooted itself into the ground, pinning them in place. An instinctive application. It's etched into his very marrow, Dumbledore commented, eyeing the shadows. So, you're saying some unknown dark wizard is masquerading as a child? Kingsley muttered. Quite the opposite. I suspect the dark magic is innate to this child. He uses it as naturally as breathing. I certainly can't use transfiguration with that level of subconscious ease. Dumbledore began to dismantle the shadow chains. It wasn't difficult. Kane's 11-year-old reserves were no match for over a century of Dumbledore's refined power. Where to next? Kingsley asked, shaking off the remaining darkness. He's a clever boy, but not an evil one. I doubt he's prepared a Three Burrows escape plan yet. To his motel, then, Dumbledore commanded calmly. As Dumbledore and Kingsley waited to squat on him, Kane was walking back, eating a hot dog and chatting with Maxwell. We've known each other so long, and you didn't even offer to help. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. You handled it beautifully on your own. Besides, this isn't the constant, my authority doesn't carry here. Unlike you, who somehow managed to borrow a portion of the shadow authority and bring it into the light. Maybe it's talent. Who knew the shadows would cling to me even after I escaped that place? Kane sighed, taking a large bite of his hot dog. The shadow authority wasn't as convenient as people thought. The entity back in the constant had been robbed of a piece of itself, and it wasn't happy. Last night was proof, sending shadow creatures to hunt him down and drag his soul back to the abyss. Maxwell seemed to sense his distress. You are in the physical world now. The shadows of the constant are weakened when they reach this far, but your internal shadows are not. Tonight is your chance. If you're prepared, you might even be able to tear away a few more pieces of authority from him. I know. I won't be as pathetic as I was last night, Kane said. He had reached the rundown motel. He pulled his key from his pocket and walked toward his room. Suddenly, he froze. His instincts screamed. He dropped the key and turned to bolt, only to run straight into Dumbledore and Kingsley once more. Young gentleman, Dumbledore said gently. Your magic trick isn't quite finished yet. Talk about persistent fans. This level of saucing behavior is enough to make me want to call the police, Kane said with a helpless smile, delivering a threat that didn't sound particularly threatening. Kingsley rubbed his nose awkwardly. He had just remembered that he was, in fact, an Auror. In any case, please believe us when we say we mean you no harm. It is simply that, as a young wizard of exceptional status, you require an education, Dumbledore said warmly. Or a trip to Azkaban, Kingsley added, his professional instincts kicking in. To keep Kane in line, he instinctively slipped into a good cop, bad cop routine, naturally assuming the role of the stern, bad cop. Dumbledore glanced back with a look of mild exasperation. Kingsley suddenly found that his mouth wouldn't open. Dumbledore then turned back to Kane. Please ignore him. My name is Albus Dumbledore. I am the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, a place dedicated to teaching young witches and wizards how to harness their magic. All right, no harm. I suppose I can see that. So this is just a home visit. You really should have sent a letter in advance, Kane said, deciding to play along. There wasn't much use in resisting. Given the current situation, he wasn't going anywhere. Perhaps the owl carrying your letter got stuck in a draft. No matter. Now tell me about your parents. Dumbledore asked. I don't have any. I am sorry to hear that, Dumbledore said, his expression softening into one of apology before shifting the topic. Would you mind telling me how you came to master such remarkable magic? Is this part of the home visit too? Naturally, Dumbledore nodded. Well, it was a rather unpleasant adventure, Kane said vaguely. Dumbledore, being perceptive, sensed the boy's reluctance and changed the subject again. Since you now know you are a wizard, you must also understand the rules of the magical world. Kingsley, you are the expert on this. With a subtle gesture, Dumbledore allowed Kingsley to speak again. For the next 10 minutes, Kane was forced to endure a long-winded lecture. The gist was simple: exposing magic to muggles is a catastrophe for both worlds. Kane was strictly forbidden from using magic in front of non-magical people, especially since his magic was a very pure form of the dark arts, which was doubly prohibited. "But I have to eat," Kane said, leaning against the wall. He asked the question with a flat tone that carried shocking weight. Dumbledore and Kingsley both froze. Kane was currently earning his living by performing magic on street corners. Telling him not to use magic was essentially telling him to starve. Unless the Ministry or Hogwarts intended to cover his room and board, they had no moral ground to stand on. "Perhaps you could come to Hogwarts early," Dumbledore suggested, taking the responsibility upon himself. He knew the beings at the Ministry. If Kane spent a month under their supervision before starting school, he'd likely graduate as the next Voldemort. The Ministry had a unique talent for making their own people miserable. Kane looked at Dumbledore's sincere face and then at the massive silhouette of Hogwarts Castle. He no longer regretted following the old man here. Dumbledore first led Kane to his office. "Since the sorting ceremony hasn't happened yet, you can't stay in the student dormitories. However, we have two options. A. You can stay here with me." "I'll take the second option," Kane said instantly. He wasn't used to sleeping in the same room as others, and he was a restless sleeper. He had once nearly kicked Harry out of the cupboard under the stairs. He didn't want to accidentally kick the headmaster into several fragile pieces. Dumbledore smiled. "Congratulations. I think you'll like your new roommate. I'll call Severus. He is our potions master. His home at Spinner's End is being renovated this summer, so he's staying at the castle. I'm sure you'll find him charming." Dumbledore conjured a silvery, translucent bird that flew out of the office. Moments later, the bird returned with a message from the man named Severus: "If you dare send that boy here, don't be surprised if I turn him into a potion ingredient. Can't you just find an empty classroom for me to crash in?" Kane asked, staring at Dumbledore. Dumbledore simply shook his head. If he didn't have Kane under his roof, how could he study the low-intensity dark magic experiments that occurred every night after midnight? It was all about strategy. Lunch is at noon, dinner is at 7 in the Great Hall. Curfew is at 10, make sure you're back by then. For the rest of the time, feel free to explore the castle. Dumbledore gave him total freedom, making sure Kane didn't feel like a prisoner despite not yet being an official student. "Wait, your office has a second bed, right?" Kane asked as he headed for the door. "Ah, you'll have to forgive me. My old bones can't manage the top bunk," Dumbledore said apologetically. "Bunk beds. That's luxury," Kane muttered, stepping out of the headmaster's office. "The castle is nice, isn't it? The Constant didn't have places where you could safely study magic," Maxwell suddenly said, appearing beside him. "You shouldn't have left so quickly. You should have asked the old wizard to teach you a few tricks, or you might not survive the night." "I don't need a reminder. I have a plan," Kane replied. "If I infuse the shadows into physical matter in this world, I might be able to make a small campfire." "And after that, are you planning to build a science machine?" Maxwell asked. "Once I find some gold. For now, the plan is firewood," Kane said. He sat on the banister and slid from the 8th floor down to the 6th, searching for the next set of stairs. Soon, he left the castle and headed toward the Forbidden Forest. He snapped a few branches, gathered some stones and tall grass, and sat on the ground. His hands moved with practiced speed. And in a matter of moments, he had crafted a crude axe, looking like something straight out of an early access survival game. As he shouldered the axe and walked into the forest, a less than pleasant memory flickered in his mind. A magical school's forest shouldn't have tree guards, right? Well, sticking to the outskirts for some small logs should be fine. A while later, Hagrid emerged from the depths of the Forbidden Forest with Fang. He stopped dead in his tracks, watching Kane, who was staggering back toward Hogwarts with a bundle of firewood in his arms and pockets stuffed with grass. Quote? Kane didn't notice Hagrid appearing behind him. He remained focused on his task, inching toward the castle one step at a time while clutching the firewood he'd worked so hard to chop. Suddenly, the weight in his arms vanished. He looked up to see a massive fellow, nearly 3 meters tall with a kind, honest face, effortlessly lifting the entire bundle of logs. Hogwarts hasn't even started term yet. How'd you end up here? Hagrid asked as he relieved Kane of his burden. Professor Dumbledore brought me back. He won't let me use magic outside, but I can't survive without it, so I was brought here, Kane replied, opening up easily. Between meeting Dumbledore, Kingsley, and now this giant of a man, the wizards of this world seemed remarkably kind. It was a sharp contrast to the stereotypical image of a wizard. Did escaping the constant make me view everything like it's a beginner's starting village? Hagrid paused to think. You don't have parents, no, wait, you're guardians, look, all you need to know is I don't mean no harm. My tongue just gets tied sometimes. I'm Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. Kane Heath. I am indeed an orphan, there's no need to tiptoe around it, Kane said, looking up at Hagrid, who looked like he was about to give himself a panic attack from overthinking his words. If a guy this big fainted from lack of oxygen, not even Kane's shadows would be enough to drag him back to the castle. Sorry about that anyway, Kane, what are you doing with all this wood? Hagrid asked, eager to change the subject. Building a campfire. Unfortunately, I haven't found the right stones yet. Kane looked at Hagrid with his dull, dark-circled eyes. Instinct told him this man definitely had a solution. Sure enough, Hagrid patted his chest. That's easy. I'll take you down to the Black Lake later. Plenty of stones there, and you can build your fire right by my hut if you like. When I was in school, I loved making a fire to roast a few potatoes or some sausages. Hagrid beckoned Kane toward his hut. Though called a hut, it was built to accommodate Hagrid's massive frame, making it look quite imposing at first glance, even if the overall aesthetic was Mountain Village Warehouse. Professor Dumbledore's employee benefits are a bit stingy, Kane commented politely. Strictly speaking, Dumbledore saved me from Azkaban and brought me here. I'm more than happy with a place like this. Besides, it's not a hardship. If I stand up straight in the castle offices, I'll crack my head on the ceiling, Hagrid explained, defending Dumbledore. That was the second time today Kane had heard the name, Azkaban. So, what exactly is this place? This, Azkaban. Hagrid's face instantly turned solemn. It's the wizard prison. Inside, there's... Okay, say no more, Kane waved a hand. Looks like we're in the same boat. Dumbledore saved me from Azkaban, too. Kane remembered the bad cop. Kingsley mentioning the word with such dramatic flair. Even if he suspected they were just trying to scare a kid, it was a great way to bond with Hagrid. Hagrid looked both shocked and furious. Azkaban, you're so young. How could they even think of sending you there? Those ministry lot are getting more out of hand by the day. Tell me about it. Anyway, Hagrid, are we still getting those stones? Hagrid snapped out of it, shoved Fang into his doghouse, and led Kane toward the Black Lake. The shores of the Black Lake offered more than just campfire rocks. There were pebbles, agates, plant fossils, and bits of jade. Kane didn't need the fancy stuff yet, so he just grabbed a few sturdy rocks and headed back to the hut. Hagrid helped, of course. He was incredibly literal. He used his moleskin overcoat to carry a mountain of stones that could have crushed Kane flat, piling them outside the hut like a small burial mound. Kane immediately set to work. By infusing the firewood with shadow beforehand, the resulting fire would dispel external shadows far more efficiently than burning his own essence. If it worked, he'd not only get a good night's sleep but might even be able to harvest a few shadow creatures to strengthen himself and get rid of those dark circles under his eyes. Hagrid watched with interest, pulling out a fresh set of flint and steel. He felt that starting a fire manually was far more ceremonial than using magic. But as he reached for the flint, he saw a mass of dark shadow materialize in Kane's hand. Kane pressed it directly onto the arranged logs. In an instant, the fire roared to life. To Hagrid's eyes, even though it looked like a normal flame, it felt eerie. Bizarre. Absurd. Even if it looked warm, there was something fundamentally wrong about it. Kane, what kind of magic is that? Hagrid swallowed hard. He wasn't a magic expert, but he knew that creepy shadow wasn't exactly light side material. Shadows. I was born with it. That's why Hogwarts found me and why they almost dragged me to Azkaban, Kane said casually, waving a hand. A feeling warmer than heat enveloped him. In the constant, these fires were the only anchors of safety. Feeling that familiar warmth allowed his frayed nerves to relax for the first time in ages. Hagrid had felt a flicker of panic at the sight of such natural dark magic, but seeing Kane just sit there quietly, staring into his special campfire with a look of peaceful exhaustion, his fear vanished. He decided then and there that judging people solely by their magic was a mistake. I really shouldn't be so jumpy, Hagrid thought. He sat down on the ground beside Kane. Seeing a flame flicker lower, Hagrid picked up a log and tossed it in. Strangely, the log didn't catch fire. It sat in the flames looking completely unaffected, as if it were made of fireproof asbestos rather than wood. What's this then? Hagrid stared at the log that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. It needs a bit of secret sauce. Kane willed a thread of shadow to latch onto the log. Immediately, it began to burn, making the fire even brighter. Hagrid looked at Kane with wide eyes, pointing at the pile of wood nearby, eager to help feed the fire. Don't. Using too much makes you lose sanity, Kane refused immediately. Lose sanity. Hagrid heard yet another new term. Think of it as your brain getting too tired. If it drops too low, monsters will come and try to kill you, Kane explained offhandedly. Hagrid scratched his head. Well, young wizards always did have vivid imaginations. Kane saw the look on Hagrid's face and knew he wasn't believed, but he didn't care to explain further. Suddenly, the bells of Hogwarts rang in the distance. Hagrid stood up and pulled Kane to his feet. Sounds like lunch. Let's get going. If you can get on the good side of Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape before term starts, I guarantee your first year'll be brilliant. Hagrid trailed off, his expression becoming slightly pained. Actually, maybe don't worry too much about being familiar with Professor Snape. At noon, only 5 people ate in the Great Hall, so they all gathered around a single table. Kane already recognized Albus Dumbledore and Rubeus Hagrid. There were 2 others. One was the professor who had previously only existed in Dumbledore's words, Severus Snape, a man with greasy hair and a perpetually sour expression. The other was Argus Filch, the castle caretaker, something like a disciplinarian. His appearance rather resembled a vulture. Deputy Headmistress Minerva McGonagall should have been present as well, but she had discovered that one of the young witches or wizards who had already been sent an acceptance letter had run away from home. As a result, the letter never reached its recipient, and now, without a doubt, she had left Hogwarts to search the world for that troublesome child. After hearing Dumbledore's explanation, Kane silently broke into a cold sweat for that runaway wizard. What kind of grievance would drive someone to flee home like that? Tears of sympathy nearly slipped from the corner of his mouth. Dumbledore, seeing this, smiled gently. Everyone, eat. As the quiet sounds of dining filled the table, Snape suddenly lifted his head and glanced at Dumbledore. And that one is an unfortunate young wizard, Kane Heath, Dumbledore replied, then turned to Kane. This is Hogwarts, potions master, Severus Snape. Naturally, Kane wanted to leave a good impression on his future professor. After wiping his hands with a napkin, he leaned past Dumbledore and extended his hand. Snape paused briefly, then shook it with restrained politeness. In that instant, he understood something unusual about Kane. Inside the child's body lurked a bizarre, absurd aura of dark magic, illogical, like a madman's crude sketch. It felt as though it might burst out of him at any moment and lunge forward. This child absolutely must not be sorted into Slytherin. And once term began, he would have to strictly restrain those troublesome Slytherins. Being marked by something like this, Hogwarts would suffer for it, silently. Their hands separated quickly. Dumbledore spoke again at the right moment. Under normal circumstances, most young witches and wizards would have already received their Hogwarts letters and begun shopping in Diagon Alley. Hagrid, could I trouble you to take the child there this afternoon? Hagrid thumped his chest with a booming laugh. Of course, no problem. At that moment, Dumbledore suddenly remembered something important, one of those once-in-a-lifetime rituals. He left the table in a hurry. Within minutes, an owl swooped down from the ceiling, clutching a magnificent envelope, and dropped it before Kane. This is a ceremony every young wizard must experience. Go on, open it. Kane glanced at the slightly smudged ink on the envelope. It was obvious Dumbledore had written it just moments ago. Out of respect for the elderly, he cooperated and opened it. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, Order of Merlin First Class, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. Dear Mr. Kane Heath, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I'm going to frame this letter, Kane muttered after reading it through. He carefully folded it and slipped it into his coat pocket without creasing it. Oh, right, the wand mentioned in the letter. Dumbledore drew out his own wand. This, through the wood and the magical core within, it helps a wizard channel their magic. With guidance and intent, even simple magic can become something extraordinary. What I mean is, can a wand be customized? Kane asked. Ollivander's shop has hundreds, thousands, of combinations. Careful selection is not so different from customization, Dumbledore replied with a smile. Or are you thinking of using some special materials? Hey, Kane suddenly asked inwardly, can you get me some living wood, or nightmare fuel or something? He knew Maxwell would hear him. Of course not, Maxwell replied, suddenly appearing across the table, hands resting on its surface with a smile. But you could infect ordinary wood with your own shadow. As for nightmare fuel, judging by things, your sanity will hit 0 in about 2 days. When the shadow creatures come for you, just kill them yourself. Kane, who had been calmly drinking pumpkin juice, suddenly choked violently. Hagrid kindly patted his back, unfortunately, with a giant's strength. Kane nearly went flying, but at least he stopped coughing. Eat slowly, Dumbledore said kindly. This is Hogwarts, food is the one thing you'll never lack again. I know. Kane steadied himself, then glanced again at Maxwell. In the real world, what could possibly make my sanity drop? Yourself, Maxwell shrugged, and vanished. Are you all right? Dumbledore asked. Kane shook his head. I'm fine. Can I go to Diagon Alley tomorrow instead? I have something to take care of this afternoon. Of course. Tomorrow morning it is. If you need anything in the meantime, ask Hagrid, or come to me. Dumbledore smiled, accepting the request on Hagrid's behalf. Kane shoveled a bit more ice cream into his mouth, wiped his lips, and slipped out of Hogwarts Castle. Dumbledore watched Hagrid continue eating heartily and couldn't help coughing. Dumbledore, are you catching a cold? Hagrid asked. Hagrid, I meant for you to follow Kane, Dumbledore said plainly. Oh, right, the Forbidden Forest is huge. Wouldn't want him running into danger. Hagrid quickly stood and hurried out. I think what you truly fear isn't that he'll encounter danger, Snape said coolly, but that he'll create something far worse. Dumbledore pressed a hand to his chest. I have a very bad feeling. Snape showed no interest in that ominous intuition, but someone else at the table did. Filch rasped, Dumbledore, weren't all the acceptance letters supposed to be sent out already? That boy's letter looked freshly written. Doesn't that mean he wasn't accepted by the Book of Admittance at all? Dumbledore shook his head. No, I checked the records, the letter was indeed sent out 2 days ago. But it seems that when it arrived, Kane had already run away from home, and successfully at that. Silence fell over the table. Oh, Minerva is absolutely going to storm into my office and slam the desk when she gets back, Dumbledore sighed. Meanwhile, at number 4, Privet Drive, Professor McGonagall stood before the house. Compared to a mysteriously vanished child, even the boy who lived, Harry Potter, seemed less urgent. After all, no matter how poorly Harry lived, he was still alive. But that missing child, his fate was truly unknown. Adjusting her immaculate hair one last time, McGonagall raised her hand, and knocked on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Professor McGonagall waited for a moment. Soon, the door was opened by someone she knew quite well from a distance. Excuse me, who are you looking for? Harry asked, looking at her politely. Hello, Harry. Long time no see. I am looking for a young man named Kane Heath, about your age, Professor McGonagall said, pulling an envelope from her robes and handing it to Harry. I brought this for you while I was at it. Having said that, she politely maneuvered past Harry and entered the house, coming to a stop in the hallway and waiting for the two adults of the house to appear. "And you are?" Vernon, who was off work today, walked out. Seeing the elegantly and meticulously dressed Professor McGonagall, he asked a cautious question. "I am the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Minerva McGonagall. I have come to inquire about a missing young wizard, Kane Heath, and to deliver the acceptance letter for Harry Potter," Professor McGonagall stated directly. "We won't have them going to some freak school. You can leave now, this house is not welcome to you," Vernon barked. The moment he heard the words, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, it was as if his PTSD had flared up, and he instinctively tried to throw McGonagall out. In the magical world, the will of a guardian is merely an opinion, the true right of decision belongs to the wizard themselves. Furthermore, even if you are unwilling to let the two children attend Hogwarts, you surely must know where Mr. Heath is currently located. Professor McGonagall walked toward Vernon with an air of authority, eventually forcing him back into the living room before she stopped. "I've already called the police about that annoying brat Kane Heath. The police will find him. I don't need you causing trouble here," Vernon insisted, putting up a brave front. "No, let her check. She can find him," Petunia Dursley said, having heard the commotion from upstairs. She hurried down and spoke quickly after listening to the situation. "Petunia, sigh." Vernon groaned and returned to his usual sofa, turning the TV volume up to the maximum. He muttered bitterly to himself, "Two freaks. One freak finally gets lost, and now another shows up." With a simple wave of her wand, Professor McGonagall shielded herself, Harry, and Petunia from the noise. "Can you find Kane?" Harry asked firmly. "Perhaps. Do you have anything that has been touched by Kane's power? Clothes, specific jewelry, or perhaps something from his room? A drawing he made?" Harry and Petunia exchanged a look and shook their heads. Suddenly, Harry remembered something. He ran back to his small room under the stairs and pulled out the clothes he had worn the night he chased Kane. The clothes hadn't been washed yet, there should still be traces of the shadows Kane had used on his shoulders. "Look, would there be some marks on the shoulders?" Harry handed the clothes to Professor McGonagall. McGonagall used her wand to probe the fabric. Sure enough, she extracted a wisp of dark shadow. However, in an instant, the shadow streaked off in the direction of Hogwarts, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Professor, that was." Harry was a bit dazed by the sight, while Petunia, watching with forced composure, slowly took half a step back. "I can only say that Mr. Heath is, at the very least, still alive," McGonagall said cautiously. "Yeah, he's so capable, he's bound to survive. But he probably isn't living very well. It's lunchtime now, he might be scavenging in a dumpster in some corner right now." Harry said pessimistically, imagining things that weren't actually happening. He quickly looked back at McGonagall. "Can you find him?" "That is certain. Even if I cannot, Albus Dumbledore would not ignore a missing young wizard," McGonagall promised. "Then Professor, I'll definitely see him at that Hogwarts place, right?" Harry brandished the acceptance letter in his hand. "You will. Do you wish to?" McGonagall started to ask. "I'm going to knock his teeth out," Harry said fiercely. Recalling the sensation of that incredibly pure dark magic shadow, McGonagall felt that Harry was quite the character, daring to think and daring to act. She then turned her gaze back to Petunia. "This child needs a room, clothes of his own, and to attend Hogwarts. Of course, this is merely an opinion." "That's impossible," Vernon roared from the living room. McGonagall glanced at him. All right. Petunia, go clear out a room for Mr. Potter." Vernon's voice dropped several decibels. "And," McGonagall continued, "we'll let him go to that school, but we only permit him to leave this house. We won't involve ourselves in anything else." This was Vernon's bottom line. He would rather die than go to a wizarding area to buy textbooks or attend a parent-teacher meeting. "I will arrange for someone to take your place," McGonagall said, looking back at Harry. "Tomorrow morning, someone from the Weasley family will come to help you purchase the items needed for school. They are wonderful people, you'll recognize them by their red hair." "I understand, Professor," Harry nodded. After Professor McGonagall left, She apparated back to Hogsmeade and took a secret passage straight to Hogwarts Castle. A missing young wizard with such dense dark magic was something that needed to be discussed thoroughly with Dumbledore. She soon walked into Dumbledore's office. 2 cups of black tea and a crystal ball were sitting on his desk. Dumbledore, this matter. Dumbledore raised a finger to his lips. A missing young wizard with traces of dark magic. I know. If you know, then why are you just sitting here? McGonagall asked, crossing her arms sternly. Because I have already found him and brought him back. Right now, he's treasure hunting in the Forbidden Forest. As Dumbledore spoke, McGonagall stepped closer to look at the crystal ball in the center of the desk. The image inside showed Kane and Hagrid in the Forbidden Forest. They had been wandering around for quite a while. So, Kane, are you really sure there are tree guards in the Forbidden Forest? Hagrid asked, huffing for breath. Kane shook his head. I'm not sure. Well, I was just as imaginative when I was 11. I understand you. Let me ask another way. What do you want a tree guard for? Hagrid followed up. I'm going to take it down and use its living logs as material for my wand, Kane said with complete honesty. The problem is, Kane, we might not have tree guards here, Hagrid said bitingly. No worries, I have a plan. Kane pulled out an oak seed. This seed had been thoroughly corrupted by his shadows. Once this tree grew, it was guaranteed to be a tree guard. Now, the only thing missing was the magic to make the seed sprout and mature instantly. And that was a type of magic Hagrid just happened to have. What are they doing in that little dirt pit? McGonagall frowned as she watched Kane and Hagrid squatting on the ground, digging away. I don't know. Perhaps they're reforesting the Forbidden Forest. Dumbledore had been speaking with a chuckle, but suddenly his smile vanished. He stared at the image in the crystal ball with a look of utter bewilderment. Wait, what is that? Oh, I'll need to get in touch with Newt. He might have some idea. Dumbledore muttered. He was about to use a portkey to head straight to Newt Scamander's house before suddenly remembering that he was the headmaster and didn't need to be so dramatic. He vanished on the spot. Meanwhile, Professor McGonagall was already sprinting toward the Forbidden Forest. While the appearance of a new magical species was significant, she was far more concerned with the actual lives of Kane and Hagrid. Back in the office, Dumbledore reappeared shortly with another white-haired old man. The two of them immediately turned their attention to the scene in the crystal ball. A tree, 4 meters tall and as thick as a water barrel, had abruptly yanked its roots out of the soil. In a disturbingly humanoid fashion, it was stomping toward Hagrid, its branches flailing and lashing out in a wild attack. Behind the tree beast was a small wizard, swinging an axe with everything he had, hacking away at the trunk. The 2 elder wizards watched for a full 3 seconds. Finally, the magizoologist, Newt Scamander, gave the answer Dumbledore had expected. I don't recognize it. But the Forbidden Forest is vast, finding a few magical plants or animals we've never seen before is perfectly acceptable. Though, shouldn't you be more worried about protecting those 2 children? Newt asked. Well, seeing as they grew this big fellow themselves, or more accurately, the young wizard grew it himself, I'm inclined to believe they have the ability to handle it, Dumbledore said calmly. He then heard the sound of Newt Scamander's heart nearly jumping out of his chest. What did you say? Newt stared at Dumbledore in shock. This thing was grown. Is it some sort of mutant whomping willow? Newt immediately went into research mode, though it still felt off. I think I'll go ask the boy myself, Newt said, pulling a traveling broom from his pocket and flying straight out the window. Still as enthusiastic as a young lad, Dumbledore smiled as he watched Newt fly off. He then stepped out of his office and began a leisurely stroll toward the castle grounds. Things were not quite so peaceful in the Forbidden Forest. The damage Kane dealt with his axe was far greater than anything Hagrid was doing to the tree beast, so, unfortunately, the tree guard had shifted its target entirely to Kane. However, it wasn't that unfortunate. To Hagrid's eyes, watching Kane fight this massive entity was like watching someone bully a toddler. Kane would dart under the tree's feet, land 4 quick chops, thud 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 thud, and then sprint a safe distance away, waiting for the tree's heavy strike to land before rushing back in for more. But just as a mother always thinks you're hungry, Professor McGonagall always thinks you're in danger. She landed her broom gracefully and shouted, "Mr. Heath, get back. I'll handle this monster." Kane was more startled by her sudden appearance than by the tree's attacks. He quickly jogged over to block her path, waving his hands frantically. "No, no, no. This tree guard has to be killed by my hand for it to work." "But it's dangerous," McGonagall barked, hands on her hips, incensed by Kane's apparent recklessness. She hadn't even settled the score with him for running away and making her trip to Little Whinging a waste of time. But this big dummy isn't scary at all. "Look, we've been talking for a while and it's only managed 3 steps, Kane explained. "Sigh," McGonagall groaned. She flicked her wand, and the solid ground erupted into stone pillars that bound the tree guard from head to toe, pinning it so it couldn't move an inch. "Go on then, get it over with," McGonagall said crossly. As she watched Kane charge back in with his axe, she turned to Hagrid. "Hagrid, go help him." Hagrid spread his hands helplessly. "He won't let me. Kane says the item he needs only appears if he deals the finishing blow." McGonagall was baffled. Soon, Newt Scamander arrived as well. Watching Kane's axe bite into the wood, Newt felt every blow as if it were landing on his own skin. He instinctively wanted to save the tree, but McGonagall held him back. "Mr. Heath says this is for obtaining something specific." Newt sighed. Since the boy had grown the tree himself, Newt had no standing to demand he spare it. He could only comfort himself with the thought that plants don't have nervous systems. Finally, with one last blow, the tree guard collapsed. It dissolved into several logs and one specific item, a stick about 35 centimeters long and as thick as a fist, bearing a distorted face that was currently wailing and twisting in agony. Dumbledore, having arrived at some point, walked over. He didn't touch it, he simply squatted down to observe the screaming piece of wood before looking at Kane. "Is this what you required?" "It certainly looks like a unique material for a wand," Dumbledore noted. "It looks like it's in pain," Newt couldn't help but say, stepping forward. "Oh, it's faking," Kane said, poking it with a finger. "Stop screaming or I'll burn you." The log went silent instantly, letting out only a low, muffled sob as Kane picked it up. "And who are these two?" Kane asked, looking at McGonagall and Newt. "Minerva McGonagall. You may call me Professor McGonagall. I am the head of Gryffindor House, deputy headmistress, and the poor soul who went to number 4 Privet Drive today to investigate your disappearance." "You've made me run a very long errand, young man," she said pointedly. "My apologies, Professor." Facing the deputy headmistress, Kane maintained a polite, charming smile. McGonagall looked at the young wizard. There was an old saying, at 3, you see the child, at 7, you see the man. Judging by what Kane was willing to do before even starting school, she could already imagine the chaos he would cause once he was actually a student. A talented Gryffindor, she wondered, but remembering the dark magic he left on Harry's clothes, Ravenclaw or Slytherin were just as likely. "I don't blame you. The Dursley home is not a place for many to thrive. But you must explain yourself to Harry. He was very worried," McGonagall added. "I'll go back to see him during the holidays," Kane said. He felt it was too early to see Harry, his dark circles were terrifying right now. If Harry saw him like this, he'd look like a fool who chose to suffer for the sake of pride. Better to wait until he was cleaned up at Hogwarts and perhaps learn some magic that wasn't so shady to help Harry's situation. The adults exchanged strange looks. It was clear Kane didn't realize Harry was a wizard too. They decided not to spoil the surprise. Seeing their reunion at the sorting ceremony or on the Hogwarts Express would be a treat. When it was Newt's turn, Hagrid introduced his idol first. "This is Newt Scamander, a very brilliant magizoologist." Newt knelt down in front of Kane with a smile. "Child, this tree guard, you grew it." Kane looked at Newt. He wasn't worried about being captured as a seed-making machine, he answered honestly. "I used my magic to modify an oak seed. Once the modified seed grows, it becomes a tree guard. And can this seed be mass-produced? I wouldn't recommend it. It wouldn't be good for the world. As for why I did it, I suppose I was being a bit selfish," Kane said awkwardly. "No," Dumbledore shook his head. "You weren't being selfish. You were being unexpectedly responsible. Pardon. Kane looked at Dumbledore, wondering what the wise old man had seen. If I had possessed a world-changing power beyond my years at your age, even if no one knew, I likely would have tried my best to share it, to broadcast it, without a single thought as to whether it was appropriate or what negative impact it might have on the world. Dumbledore's voice carried a hint of wistful melancholy. All I would have sought was a bit of empty praise. Yet you, at your age, already realize that power wielded recklessly can be a detriment to this world. Kane watched as Dumbledore drifted into his philosophical musings. He looked at Hagrid with a confused expression and whispered, "Does he do this often?" Well, it might just be the way Professor Dumbledore thinks things through," Hagrid said, choosing his words carefully. Fair enough. Kane knew better than to expect a straight answer to that one. By evening, Kane had finished his meal early. He sat on a small rock by the shore of the Black Lake, staring silently at the water. His shadow, stretched long by the setting sun, writhed and coiled across the ground, its dark tendrils reaching out to snag small insects and dragging them into the abyss. "What do you make of the boy?" In the headmaster's office, Dumbledore spoke to Snape, who was watching Kane's shadow through a crystal ball. "The dark arts have soaked so deeply into his soul that it's manifesting in his shadow." Snape offered a cold critique before glancing sideways at Dumbledore. "You still insist on collecting dangerous individuals. I won't be surprised if a few students turn up dead this year. You really only know how to bully a slow old man like me, don't you?" "Well, I suppose you bully the young ones just as much," Dumbledore said softly. "But I want to know if you understand why he's sitting there, doing nothing. Isn't that a good thing? I expect the moment he gets a wand tomorrow, he'll open a chamber of secrets of his own and start brewing catastrophes. We should be grateful he's being quiet. My point is," Dumbledore said, cutting through the sarcasm, "look at how he's sitting. Doesn't it look like he's fishing? And he is the bait." Snape frowned. Before he could respond, the shadow of a withered tree near Kane suddenly came alive. The shadow warped into a distorted, jagged monster, looking like a child's scribbled nightmare, and lunged at Kane with clawed hands. In that split second, Kane's own elongated shadow twisted into a thick, serpentine coil. It lashed out like a python, constricting the shadow monster until it shattered into a spray of black smoke and dissipating sparks. Kane reached down, picked something up from the ground, and shoved it into his pocket. What was that? Snape narrowed his eyes. The thing he put in his pocket. Now, Severus, don't be so curious about a boy's privacy. Snape instinctively wanted to snap back, but he settled for a sneer. Spoken with the confidence of a man currently spying through a crystal ball. "I'll take that as a compliment." Snape left the office soon after. On his way back to the castle from the lake, Kane harvested a few more shadow creatures, collecting several pieces of nightmare fuel. Before heading inside, he made a quick detour to Hagrid's yard, where he literally pried up the entire campfire, turf and all, and carried it back. What on earth? Dumbledore considered himself a man of great fortitude, but Kane's antics were testing his limits. "I'm afraid of the dark," Kane said simply. He began scouting the headmaster's bedroom for the perfect spot, trying to ensure the campfire's glow would reach the top bunk. Suddenly, Dumbledore's old bones seemed perfectly fine. He scrambled up to the top bunk with a speed that left Kane blinking. "I hope we don't succumb to smoke inhalation. Let's leave the window open," Dumbledore said with a flick of his wand, causing the window to swing open gently. Below him, Kane was already stoking the fire. As the wood began to crackle and pop, Kane felt a wave of relief. He could finally get some real sleep. Early to bed, early to rise. A good little wizard doesn't meet Sister Charlie. "Kane," Dumbledore said from above. He felt the time was right for that classic roommate bonding chat. "Kane." But there was no response. Perhaps today had been too exhausting. Kane had fallen asleep almost instantly. Dumbledore, with a head full of questions about shadow monsters, nocturnal dark magic spikes, tree guards, and sentient logs, found himself forced to swallow his curiosity and go to sleep. The next morning, Dumbledore woke early. The sky was just beginning to pale. Thank Merlin the window was open, he thought, they hadn't been carried off by carbon monoxide. He climbed down quietly. The campfire by the bed was still flickering with a low flame. Kane's shadow on the wall was still restless, but it looked far more stable than it had by the lake. A comfortable, soft bed in a room with a roof, it does wonders for a young wizard's sanity. It wasn't a full recovery, but it was a start. Maybe I'll pick some flowers later and make a garland, Kane thought groggily as he woke up. As long as the shadows don't turn them into evil petals, shadows are shadows, ghosts are ghosts. Best not to mix them up. Time for breakfast, Kane. Wash up and come out, Dumbledore's voice called from the other room. Coming. Breakfast in the Great Hall was a busier affair this morning, a grand total of 6 people. Kane ate heartily while listening to Hagrid's Diagon Alley preview. Hagrid talked about magical ice cream, goblin-run banks, the brick wall, and the transition into Nocturne Alley. In Kane's eyes, however, none of it was as interesting as the honey-slathered toast in front of him. On the other side of the table, Professor McGonagall sipped her porridge in silence. She thought of Harry, who had sworn to knock Kane's teeth out, and wondered if those teeth would still be in Kane's mouth by the end of the day. Should she give him a warning? Certainly not. Let it be a surprise. Breakfast ended, and Kane waited by a tree stump outside Hagrid's hut while the giant got ready. Professor McGonagall told me the Weasleys will be at Diagon Alley today, Hagrid said as he emerged. You'll like them. Good people, the lot of 'em. And there's a boy your age starting this year too. You'll get along great. Hope so, Kane nodded. He reached out and touched the portkey with Hagrid, and with a familiar tug behind the navel, they vanished from Hogwarts. This is Charing Cross Road, London. For your first time, we won't use a fireplace or apparition. I'll lead you from the Muggle world so you can find your own way to Diagon Alley. Hagrid led Kane out of a small alley, pointing toward a very dilapidated and strangely out-of-place pub nearby. That there is the Leaky Cauldron. It's the gateway to the magical world in all of London. The entrance to Diagon Alley is right inside. Hagrid guided Kane into the pub. He had pre-arranged to meet the Weasleys here, but perhaps because Hagrid had spent a bit too much time tidying himself up earlier, the Weasley family seemed to have been waiting for a while. I've always liked their red hair. Seeing them at Hogwarts is like looking at the sun, Hagrid remarked. He waved toward a large family sitting in a neat row at the bar. Kane looked over at the sea of red hair, a truly flourishing family, except for one black-haired boy who looked like a genetic anomaly in the group. Wait, black hair. Kane felt something was off. He looked again. Harry, what are you doing here? Unlike the slow-to-react Kane, Harry had noticed him the second he stepped through the door. The only reason he hadn't lunged immediately was that he was acting like a seasoned hunter, waiting for the prey to enter his strike zone. And now, the time was right. Harry gave a mighty roar and lunged at Kane. I'm here to buy my school supplies. What are you doing? Surprised, Kane used his shadows to block Harry's path, shouting even as he reacted. Let go of me. I'm gonna knock your teeth out. Harry yelled, arms and legs flailing in the air. Give it a rest. You know you can't beat me, Kane said. Seeing Harry's struggle growing more intense, Kane sighed and summoned even more shadow tentacles to bind Harry up like a cocoon. Fortunately, the Leaky Cauldron was quiet this morning. Most people were either nursing hangovers from the night before or were part of the Weasley clan and the bartender, Tom. Otherwise, Kane's display of shadow magic would have had an aura called on him instantly. Of course, just because the Weasleys didn't call the auras didn't mean they weren't stunned. Mum, is that dark magic? It's so cool. I want to learn that. Ron, the youngest red-headed boy, exclaimed. He was wide-eyed, watching Kane effortlessly restrain the savior of the wizarding world. Luckily, Ron's 3 older brothers and his mother were strict on this subject. In an instant, 4 fists simultaneously bonked Ron on the head. Learn what? You're not learning that. Hagrid heard the Weasleys whispering. To prevent Kane's reputation from being ruined before school even started, he leaned in and explained in a low voice, it's an innate dark magic. He didn't learn it, and he doesn't exactly want it. Dumbledore verified it himself. That 4-part explanation successfully salvaged Kane's nearly shattered public image. Meanwhile, Kane's shadow transformed into a long, powerful claw. He had loosened the bindings on Harry but was now holding him up by the scruff of his neck, dangling him high in the air. Put me down, Harry said through gritted teeth. Only if you swear not to go crazy the moment I let go. Harry took a deep breath. Fine, I promise. Kane slowly let the shadows lower Harry to the floor. Naturally, Harry had no sense of martial honor. The moment his feet touched the ground, he lunged again. But Kane had been forged in the fires of the constant. Bang bang. 2 quick punches sent Harry to the floor, where he stayed, groaning. I'll have a lemonade, Kane said, sitting in the seat Harry had just vacated. He looked at Tom the bartender. Oh, right. Harry, are you two friends? Tom asked hesitantly as he poured the drink. Is it hard to tell? Or are we not being harmonious enough? Kane asked, taking a sip of the lemonade. Not enough, Ron said, eventually going over to help Harry up. He looked at Harry's 2 fresh, bruised eyes. You two actually look like brothers now. You've both got dark circles under your eyes, Ron chuckled, unable to help himself. Thanks for the compliment. Kane ordered 2 more lemonades from Tom. Put it on the Hogwarts tab. Hagrid, hearing this, quickly dug into his pouch and handed Kane a few gold galleons and silver sickles. Thanks, Hagrid. Kane pocketed the money without a hint of shame. Meanwhile, Hagrid finished his conversation with Mr. and Mrs. Weasley and walked over, ruffling Harry and Ron's hair. All right, all 3 new students are with me now. Ron was ecstatic. Buying school supplies with Harry Potter and a kid with, cool as hell, magic was bound to be better than being supervised by his parents. Harry, however, was conflicted. He wanted the familial warmth of the Weasleys, but he also valued his friendship with Kane. If I can't have both, I'll take the friend, he thought. After all, he'd lived through a month of chaos with Kane, whereas he'd known the Weasleys for about 45 minutes. He desperately wanted to ask how Kane had survived his time on the run. Which dumpsters did he have to scavenge from for food? How did Hogwarts find him and rescue him from his misery? Wait, those questions might be too cruel, Harry thought. I shouldn't reopen his wounds. It definitely wasn't comfortable for him. Kane watched Harry's face go through a dozen different emotions, wondering what nonsense was going through the boy's head. Should I tell him I've been living in luxury at Hogwarts while he was stuck with the Dursleys? Before he could decide, he heard the red-headed twins, George and Fred, according to their mother, start wheedling in unison. Why do we have to send little Ronnie and little Harry off? We could easily pull this young gentleman into our big family too. Personally, I think the one we should really kick out is Hagrid. Hagrid, looking annoyed, gave George and Fred each a light flick on the forehead. Mrs. Weasley sighed, poking them both. If it weren't for you two, I'd be more than happy to take Harry and Kane along. We get it. Other people's kids are always better. Mrs. Weasley felt her temper rising thanks to the twins' antics. Realizing Hagrid was still there, she awkwardly gathered her remaining children. We'll head out first, Hagrid. I'm leaving Harry and Ron in your hands. My honor, Molly. All right, let's go, boys. Shall we follow the Weasleys? Hagrid asked, looking at the trio. I wouldn't recommend it, Ron said, suddenly raising his hand. Why not? Because they're rushing off to find a private spot to give my brothers a good hiding. We'd just be interrupting their enjoyment, Ron said with a mischievous grin. Fair point. We'll wait a bit then. In that precious moment of downtime, Harry finally asked the question he'd been holding in for ages. Why did you run away? Kane raised an eyebrow. Didn't I tell you? I couldn't stand the Dursleys' psychological abuse anymore. There was a second half to that sentence he left unsaid. It was a mercy he'd left early. If Maxwell had removed that lock from him while he was still at Privet Drive, his sanity would have been ground to zero by the Dursleys' harassment within a day. Then, shadow creatures would have started dropping in to assassinate him like dumplings into boiling water. That's it. Harry looked at him suspiciously. Kane nodded firmly. Didn't you ever eavesdrop when Mr. Dursley watched Animal Planet? Even antelopes know when to migrate. If I'd stayed in that house, I actually might have died. Ron, listening to this encrypted conversation between the two, was completely lost. But he didn't have to wonder for long. Hagrid checked the time, calculating that with Mr. and Mrs. Weasley tag-teaming the twins, they'd likely finished the discipline session by now. It was time to head into Diagon Alley. Kane set down his lemonade and followed Hagrid. Harry and Ron quickly gulped down their own drinks, then simultaneously glanced at Kane's half-finished glass. Ah, caught. Well, let's keep it classy this time. The four of them headed to the courtyard behind the leaky cauldron. However, when they stepped out, Hagrid realized he'd miscalculated. The Weasleys' parental educational endeavor wasn't quite over yet. Looking a bit embarrassed, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley quickly put their shoes back on. With awkward smiles, they ushered the newcomers, Kane and Harry, to the front so they could see the specific brick in the wall. Hagrid tapped it gently with his wand. The bricks began to quiver and shift, retracting like a receding tide to reveal the street beyond. The Weasleys took Percy and the twins to buy their senior year supplies, while Hagrid led the trio of first years toward Gringotts. Before entering the bank, Hagrid fished a key from his pocket and handed it to Harry. This was left to you by your parents. Opening a vault, well, it's a rare sort of rite of passage. Thought you ought to be the one to do it. Left by my parents. Harry held the key, looking a bit dazed. They were good people. And most importantly, they loved you very much. Hagrid led them inside. The goblins didn't recognize Kane or Harry. Ron's red hair was a giveaway, but being a Weasley didn't exactly earn him a standing ovation. Eventually, Hagrid's presence caught the attention of a goblin, who came scurrying over with a fawning air. After all, who in England didn't know Hagrid was the right-hand man of the great Albus Dumbledore? Hagrid looked at Harry apologetically. Dumbledore, that's the headmaster, gave me some business to attend to first. Business first, Harry said considerately. Wonderful. I mean, thanks. The four of them, plus a goblin, piled into a clever little cart. Despite the tracks twisting and turning like a frantic dance, the passengers remained perfectly stable. They stopped briefly at Vault 713, where Hagrid retrieved a small, mysterious package, before hurtling off to Harry's Vault 687. The rite of passage, Harry. Insert the key yourself, Hagrid said. Harry nodded, rubbed the key between his fingers, and turned it in the lock. As the heavy doors rumbled open, they were met by the sound of Ron's brain short-circuiting. Blimey, is it normal for a vault to have this much gold? Ron stared in shock at the mountain of gold galleons. Your vault and my vault, they aren't exactly the same, are they? Since Harry's mum and dad couldn't give him a lot of love growing up, I guess they had to leave him a lot of money instead, Kane mused, stepping into the vault. Looking at all that gold, Kane realized he could grab 2 handfuls and have enough to build a science machine right now. But if he did that, wouldn't he be a beggar? Compared to being teased by Harry later. Tisk. He had to say no to the golden temptation. Besides, who said he couldn't earn his own gold? He didn't have a plan yet, but he had a goal. Accepting Harry's charity or having galleons forced upon him. Impossible. ... However, as the vault doors swung shut, Kane realized with a touch of embarrassment that Harry hadn't even thought about offering him any. I agonized over that for nothing. The next stop, Ollivander's. What kind of wand do you guys want? Ron asked. I brought my own materials. I'm planning to get a custom one, Kane said, pulling out the shivering living log. Merlin's beard, mate. What is that thing? Ron's eyes were instantly glued to the twisted, trembling face on the wood. I used my shadows, my innate magic, to cultivate a normal sapling. This is the result, Kane explained. Bloody hell, Kane, you're brilliant. With a skill like that, you could make a fortune in galleons. Ron exclaimed. Kane shook his head helplessly. Earning money with this isn't really possible. I'm using living logs and nightmare fuel to make a wand mainly to suit my specific constitution. In the real world, compared to other magical materials, the boost probably isn't that game-breaking. Plus, God only knew if his creations might act as a beacon for Charlie to invade this world. If that happened, Sister Charlie might accidentally wipe out half the planet in one night. Suddenly, Mr. Ollivander drifted out from behind the shelves, looking at the 3 boys with a pale, misty gaze. Kane, wanting a custom job, naturally stepped back to go last. Yielding the first spot to Harry. After trying nearly a dozen wands, Harry was finally chosen by a holly and phoenix feather wand. Next was Kane. Wait, isn't it Ron's turn? Kane asked, surprised. My family's a bit short on cash lately, Ron said sheepishly. So I'm using my brother's old wand. Kane pursed his lips. Well, since Ollivander is right here, it shouldn't cost anything for him to give it a tune-up, right? Of course not. Ollivander gently took Ron's battered wand, sighing as he examined the scuffs. Your brother Charlie did not treat this with the respect it deserves. He looked like a father seeing his battered daughter return home, sadly tending to the wounds, before handing her over to the brother, praying the boy would be more humane. Finally, it was Kane's turn. Mr. Ollivander, I have a request. I want a custom-made wand, and I've brought my own materials. Ollivander smiled. He was a craftsman, a temperamental one. No amount of money could make him break his principles. Then, Kane pulled out the snarling, face-distorted living log and a jar of nightmare fuel mixed with his own shadows. Ollivander. But on the other hand, principles are meant to be tested, aren't they? What are these? In an instant, Ollivander's eyes were captivated by the two items on the counter. They were clearly anything but ordinary. Living log and nightmare fuel. That's what I call them. Ollivander cautiously reached out a hand to touch the living log. The moment he made contact, the wood let out a sharp wail. This thing is alive. What if it dies while I'm shaping it into a wand? It's just imbued with enough magic that it acts alive. Don't worry, as long as you don't burn it, it'll be fine. If possible, though, seal its mouth. It doesn't actually speak, it just shrieks, and it's a bit too noisy, Kane said, leaning against the counter. He acted like a completely hands-off customer, leaving the materials there without a second glance. Very well, very well. Any other requirements? Ollivander asked, his voice trembling with excitement. Make it look good. And ideally, give it some extra functions. No problem, Ollivander agreed immediately. Then came the matter of the fee. A standard wand from the shop, regardless of material, is 7 galleons. But since you provided your own rare materials, how does 4 gold galleons sound? Ollivander waited for Kane to haggle. Business was business, after all. In truth, he was so addicted to his craft, and Kane had provided 2 materials he'd never seen before, that he would have done it for free. He might even have paid Kane for the privilege. But the expected haggling never came. Kane casually started to say, put it on Dumbledore's. I've got it. Harry spoke faster than Kane and moved even faster than Hagrid, who was already reaching for his pouch. Harry slapped 4 gold galleons onto the counter with the air of a true benefactor. Kane didn't skip a beat. Put it on Harry's tab, then. Ron watched this exchange in shock. This friendship game, you can play it like this. Ahem. If all goes well, you'll have your unique wand by this afternoon. Ollivander didn't even look at the gold. He snatched up the living log and the nightmare fuel as if afraid someone might steal them and vanished into his workshop. The 4 of them left the shop and proceeded to buy the usual, cauldrons, robes, the works. Kane naturally let Harry settle every bill. However, while buying books, Kane paused and looked at Hagrid. If other young wizards or orphans like me but don't have a Harry to cover for them, how do they buy their things? If a student is truly penniless and struggling, Hogwarts provides a bursary fund for their supplies. Of course, you don't exactly qualify as penniless right now. Hagrid looked at Kane, who was currently wearing a set of robes with gold thread trim, and let out a relieved laugh. These were the most luxurious robes in Madame Malkin's, warm in winter, cool in summer, self-sizing, self-repairing, dirt-repellent, and equipped with 2 pockets charmed with undetectable extension charms. Even Harry hadn't bought those for himself. Kane had a sharp eye for quality. Hagrid and Ron didn't judge. If anyone else had a friend buying them such expensive things, they'd suspect a scam or a request to do something impossibly dangerous, like splitting up to hunt down Voldemort 7 different ways. But Kane just accepted it with a blissful smile, and Harry seemed just as happy to give. That, my money is your money, vibe was actually quite admirable. With a brother like that, who cared about Voldemort. If you wanted to go fight Dumbledore, I'd probably follow you. I feel like I'm missing out on a lot, Kane said suddenly, his hand pausing on a shelf of books. In truth, the Hogwarts subsidy isn't nearly as generous as Harry's, Hagrid explained. You'd likely have a multi-hand cauldron, patched-up robes, and you'd be digging through the second-hand section for textbooks. The only thing new on you would be your wand. Ron, whose entire kit was second-hand including his wand, suddenly felt that, economically speaking, he was worse off than an orphan. Well, forget that then. Kane put the brand-new books back on the shelf and headed toward the dusty second-hand corner. Ron looked confused and leaned in toward Harry. What's up with Kane? Is he starting to feel bad about spending your money? Harry shook his head. Ron clearly didn't know Kane well enough yet. Harry was right. Kane was buying second-hand books purely because he was too lazy to take his own notes. He wanted a copy that already contained the wisdom and scribbles of those who came before him. Hagrid watched them for a moment before slipping away. He planned to get Kane and Harry a little surprise. He didn't include Ron, not because he didn't like him, but because Kane and Harry were orphans. A gift from an elder made sense. Ron had parents. An outsider buying him a gift would be like slapping the Weasleys in the face. Hagrid might not be a genius, but he understood social graces. In the bookstore, Ron looked down at his own robes, which cost about as much as a sandwich, and decided not to go down the path of living off his friends. Even though Harry had offered to pay for everything, Ron insisted on picking out and haggling for his own things, even using his spare copper nuts to buy Kane and Harry ice cream. Say, where did Hagrid go? Harry asked, licking his ice cream. Probably off on business. Diagon Alley isn't that big, he'll find us, Ron replied. Suddenly, his expression shifted. He didn't look like he was eating ice cream, he looked like he'd just bitten into something foul. Did you see someone you don't like? Kane asked. You could say that, Ron said grimly. An evil little Malfoy brat. He's like a fly, the moment he spots you, he has to come over and buzz. As if Ron's words had a summoning charm, a loud, arrogant voice rang out behind them. Well, well, well. If it isn't the disgrace to purebloods himself, the youngest Weasley. Tell me, Ron, did you find 2 nuts under the floorboards last night? Finally got enough to buy your friends some cheap ice cream? Kane felt a presence behind him. The newcomer seemed to be debating whose shoulder was worthy of being his armrest. He eventually chose Kane's, likely because Kane's robes were the most expensive. Kane felt a heavy arm drop onto his shoulder. I haven't seen these 2 before. What's the matter, Weasley? Is your family so destitute they've started making friends with mudbloods now? The boy added a bit of weight, trying to shove Kane's shoulder down. Harry looked at the blonde boy with an expression of pure pity. Ron was already reaching for his wand to defend his friend. The evil Malfoy brat is indeed annoying, Kane said calmly. But don't bother, Ron. Draco Malfoy's brow furrowed. He could tolerate Ron talking back, they were both purebloods, after all, but since when did a mudblood get to speak? Draco raised his hand, intending to give the back of Kane's head a sharp smack. But the moment he tried to move, he froze. His entire body locked up. A twisted, surreal shadow claw had erupted from the ground, gripping his wrist in a vice-like hold. Looking down, the claw extended directly from Kane's own shadow. What were you planning to do just now? Kane asked softly, looking back at the golden-haired boy, whose face had turned a ghostly, terrified white. You're not a mudblood. Which family are you from? I suggest you don't be reckless. My name is Malfoy, Draco Malfoy. For all we know, we might even be related. Staring at the surreal magic he'd never seen before, Draco immediately concluded that Kane must be the scion of some secretive, ancient magical family. Seeing Kane's clearly unfriendly expression, he scrambled to find common ground. I'm sorry to say, but my relatives are most likely all dead, Kane replied, waving a hand casually at Draco. Next time you decide to cause trouble, keep your eyes peeled. In the next instant, Draco was snatched up by the shadow claw. He was hoisted into the air and, like a failed Spider-Man, firmly bound to the ceiling by living shadows. We should find another spot. I'm worried Mr. Malfoy up there might spit in my ice cream from the ceiling, Kane said, picking up his bowl and preparing to leave the stall. Of course, the truth wasn't nearly that funny. Maxwell had just nudged him with a warning. An adult who looked remarkably like a large-sized version of Draco Malfoy was fast approaching. Harry and Ron promptly grabbed their treats and followed. Having a sobbing person looming over them from the rafters was indeed a bit of an appetite killer. It wasn't until they were well away from the stall that the reality of what had just happened fully sunk in for Harry and Ron. Ron looked at Kane, then at Harry. He finally understood why Harry was so willing to spend money on this guy. With a friend this terrifyingly powerful by your side, what was a little gold? If it were him, he'd spend it too, assuming he had any. Harry, however, was still listening to the fading wails from the shop. Thanks for being so easy on me back in that alley. I appreciate you escorting me out before running off, instead of just leaving me to sleep in a dumpster all night. Kane took a bite of ice cream and glanced at Harry. What kind of talk is that? I'm not some ungrateful lunatic. Ron's jaw dropped. So, Kane, who just took down a Malfoy without moving a finger, was once chased into an alley by Harry. As expected of the boy who lived. Defeating Voldemort as a baby was no fluke, he was clearly a beast. If Kane or Harry could hear Ron's inner monologue, they would have wondered if the boy had suffered some sort of brain fever. His ability to misinterpret a situation was truly legendary. As the three of them sat on their stacks of books by the roadside finishing their ice cream, two figures approached, one fast, one slow. One was the large Malfoy, likely the father of the boy currently decorating the ceiling. The other was Hagrid, carrying 3 large cages. Hagrid had initially thought that buying Ron a pet would be an insult to the Weasleys, but the thought of Kane and Harry having pets while Ron watched with puppy dog eyes was just too much for his soft heart to bear. Surprise for the 3 of you. Hagrid set the 3 cages down in front of them. I've bought you 3 little messengers to send your letters. Go on, take a pic. It's a surprise, so I didn't tell you. I get one too? Ron asked, stunned. Course you do. This is from me, not Hogwarts. Don't you worry about those rules for a second, Hagrid said, thumping his chest proudly. You two pick first. I'll take whatever's left, Kane said, taking a wary step back. If he'd known Hagrid was off doing this, he would have stopped him. Between his shadows and his sanity, he barely had the energy to keep himself healthy. He really didn't have the bandwidth for a bird. Still, it was a gift from the heart. He'd accept it. I'll likely be in the same dorm as Harry anyway, Kane figured. I'll just let him handle the feeding. Harry chose a snowy owl, white as a winter drift. Ron picked a grayish-brown jay. That left the final cage for Kane, a jet-black raven. Well, how do I look? Does the aesthetic match? Kane asked, lifting the raven's cage. It matches perfectly, Harry remarked dryly. Between the two of you look like you won't survive until the end of the month. Shut it, Harry. Ron, what do you think? You look like an evil dark wizard who eats children for breakfast, Ron said honestly. Quote. As Kane stood there, feeling betrayed by his 2 new, roasting specialist friends, a deep, cold voice sounded from behind him. Is this the young gentleman who glued my son to the ceiling? Kane turned around. Sure enough, same platinum hair, same haughty air as the boy in the ice cream shop. Hagrid looked confused until Harry and Ron simultaneously started explaining the ceiling Malfoy incident at 100 miles an hour. Once he grasped the situation, Hagrid immediately stepped in front of Kane. Malfoy, you wouldn't be thinking of laying a hand on a student in front of me, would you? Lucius Malfoy listened to the boy's chatter and felt a wave of frustration. Draco clearly hadn't told him the full truth, now he had to clean up his son's mess. Don't misunderstand, Hagrid. I have simply come on behalf of my immature son to apologize to this young gentleman, Lucius said smoothly. He looked at Kane. I am Lucius Malfoy. The boy on the ceiling is my son, Draco. I apologize for his rudeness. The apology seemed formal enough, but when Lucius removed a glove and extended a hand, Kane didn't take it. He simply stated his name, Kane Heath. An orphan. Lucius frowned, mentally cycling through the name, Heath, and coming up blank. It wasn't uncommon, so many pureblood and half-blood lines had been scattered or hidden during Voldemort's reign, with children ending up in Muggle orphanages. That shadow magic was far too potent to be a Muggle-born fluke, it had to be a bloodline inheritance. Kane being an orphan only strengthened the theory that he was the last of some obscure, powerful line. "It seems you are not inclined to accept my apology," Lucius noted. "Maybe you should have your son come down and apologize himself," Kane suggested. Behind him, Harry and Ron stifled giggles. Lucius remained expressionless. "He is currently on the ceiling and unable to come down." Kane understood. All this posturing was just a long-winded way of asking him to release the boy. "Prepare a cushion for him," Kane said, getting straight to the point. Lucius flicked his wand. The floor inside the ice cream shop suddenly became as soft and bouncy as jelly. In the next instant, the shadow bindings holding Draco vanished. The boy hit the floor and bounced twice. "Your son is down. We're leaving," Hagrid grunted. He couldn't stand being near Lucius for another second. "I shall look into your family history within the wizarding world," Lucius called out to Kane's retreating back. "You are certainly no mudblood." Kane gave a noncommittal shrug. "Look into my family. Good luck finding a paper trail to the constant." He was far more interested in seeing how Ollivander was doing with his custom wand. Lucius watched the four of them walk away. He felt a tug at his robes and looked down at a disheveled Draco. "Ask whatever is on your mind," Lucius commanded. "Father, why were you so polite to that fellow?" Draco asked, sounding slightly aggrieved. Lucius Malfoy glanced at him coolly. "I am simply smoothing the path for your future network, Draco." "Ha, based on our first meeting, I'm fairly certain he already hates me." Draco rolled his eyes, clearly not taking his father's words to heart. "At least you're self-aware. Now, let me test you," Lucius said softly. "Since you have already offended the other party, how should you go about salvaging this relationship?" "How?" Draco asked blankly. "An orphan, yet dressed in the finest silks, skin pale and clean, it is obvious he enjoys the finer things and has no taste for hardship. And yet, he is an orphan. What do you think sustains such a lifestyle?" Lucius prompted. "Money," Draco ventured. Seeing Lucius's thin smile, he continued, "Since he's an orphan, it must be someone else's money. But the Weasleys and that Hagrid fellow don't look like they have two sickles to rub together." The green-eyed boy. "Did you not see the lightning scar on his forehead? That is Harry Potter. The Potter estate is anything but poor," Lucius reminded him. "So, I have to compete with Potter in spending money to win over this Kane Heath." Draco frowned. Lucius knew his son wasn't exactly the most charming personality, so he set the bar a bit lower. "There is no need to compete. An ordinary friendship, or at least a lack of hostility, is enough. And that applies to Mr. Potter as well, so I have two more social tasks." "Precisely," Lucius nodded. "If possible, I would even like you to pick up the threads of friendship with the Weasleys." "A pack of paupers. What use are they?" Draco sneered. "Because they are a pack, Draco. There is power in numbers." "Of course, if you are unwilling, so be it," Lucius said dismissively. Draco looked at the four retreating figures. "They're at least pure bloods. I'll try. Just try. Good lad," Lucius said, patting the back of Draco's head. Back at Ollivander's, compared to the rest of Diagon Alley, which seems to be overflowing with brats who keep their eyes on the ceiling, this place is much better. At least it's cool and lacks other living souls. No sooner had Kane sat down on a small sofa in the corner than the bell above the door chimed. A young girl with bushy brown hair and a clean, earnest face walked in. "Oh, so many people. Should I come back later?" the girl asked reflexively. "No need, Mr. Ollivander is just finishing a custom wand for Kane. Just call for him and he'll come out," Hagrid explained. The girl nodded. "All right. I'm Hermione Granger. So, you're all first years. Except for you, sir, obviously." The last bit was directed at Hagrid. "Indeed, my youth is a distant memory," Hagrid sighed before introducing himself and the rest of the group. Hermione nodded, then began pacing the shop, hands behind her back. Communicating with her peers was clearly just as interesting to her as buying a wand. "Mr. Hagrid mentioned Mr. Ollivander is making a custom wand for you. Hermione stopped in front of Kane, who was currently having a staring contest with his raven. Kane looked up and nodded blankly. But I've read in Wand Woods and Magical Cores that the Ollivander family only uses 3 materials: unicorn hair, dragon heartstring, and phoenix feathers. I never read anything about bespoke commissions. Hermione looked puzzled. It wasn't a challenge, it was an insecurity. Was the gap between Muggle-borns and pure-bloods already this wide? She wondered. Do we get the off-the-shelf models while they get custom-tailored masterpieces? Her dream of being top of the class suddenly felt a lot more uphill. I'm sure Ollivander has made plenty of special wands. Right, Hagrid, Kane said, awkwardly deflecting. Hagrid stroked his beard. Well, now that you mention it, I've seen a few unique ones over the years. Elder wood with thestral tail hair, elder with snake nerves, elder with Keelin hair, mostly various magical feathers. Some even use their own hair. Wait, just how powerful is elder wood? Why is everyone using it? Hermione interrupted. Oh, it's not that, Hagrid explained. It's just that Professor Dumbledore's wand is elder. Most of those others were just tributes to his. Hermione nodded and looked back at Kane. So, is yours elder too? Certainly not. I've seen the headmaster's wand. It's covered in knots, looks terribly uncomfortable to hold, Kane said, waving the idea away. Hermione's heart sank again. Here she was, a Muggle-born who had just arrived in Diagon Alley, while this aristocrat had already spent enough time with the headmaster to criticize his wand ergonomics. The gap wasn't just wide, it was a canyon. Kane, totally unaware that he had just been branded a wizarding elitist, in Hermione's mind, went back to teasing his raven. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the back. Ollivander emerged, holding a long, slender box. Mr. Heath, I dare say you are going to absolutely love this. Ollivander placed the wand on the counter, waiting for Kane to come over for the right of picking it up. Kane didn't care much for rights. He looked at the wand and felt it calling to him like a long-lost limb. Because his own shadows were part of the living log and nightmare fuel, the wand was essentially an extension of himself. With a mere thought, the wand flew from the counter directly into his palm. Hermione's eyes went wide. Was that wandless magic? Kane tilted his head. I was just picking up my wand. Is there a trick to it? He looked down at his new tool. The bark of the living log had been stripped away, leaving only the dense, oily, heartwood core. It was slightly longer than average, so Ollivander had flattened it slightly, inlaying the flat sides with mithril and crystal. It looked less like a traditional wand and more like a long, elegant blade for a hidden assassin. The wailing face at the end had been scaled down proportionally. Ollivander had curved that end into a handle and, mercifully, driven 2 golden cross studs through its mouth, pinning it shut so it couldn't make a sound. Try it, Ollivander urged, looking like a proud parent. Kane nodded and gave the wand a casual flick. As he moved it, the gems inlaid in the blade glowed with a faint, ethereal light. The shadows at Kane's feet, usually so obedient, suddenly surged with life. With Kane's silent permission, the darkness detached from the floor, whipping through the air in tandem with the wand's movements. Ollivander watched his shop get tossed into chaos by the thrashing shadows, but he didn't mind a bit. He was purely enamored with his creation. Kane stopped, spinning the wand between his fingers. He was very satisfied. With a lazy wave from Ollivander, the shop tidied itself back up. Harry and Ron looked at their own wands, then at Kane's, and suddenly felt like they were holding sticks they'd found in the backyard. Hermione, meanwhile, summoned her courage and raised her hand. Mr. Ollivander, if I wanted a custom wand, what would it cost me? Ollivander looked at Hermione's earnest face and offered a small, apologetic smile. I'm sorry, miss, but I don't take custom orders. Besides, my shop contains almost every possible combination of wood and core. You could try them until next year, and it would be no different from a bespoke wand. Hermione's eyes drifted toward Kane, who was currently admiring his sleek new tool. She pointed a trembling finger. Then what about him? Kane, suddenly caught in the crossfire, pointed his wand at his own chest. Me, Ollivander, coughed into his hand, looking awkward. He shouldn't have spoken in such absolutes, but refusing custom orders was a long-standing rule. He struggled for a response. He is an exception. Hermione deflated instantly. Her upbringing had taught her the basic rules of the world early on. Those at the top enjoy privileges the rest of us can only dream of. Luxury, elite education. She hadn't expected to find a class system already firmly in place at the very first step of her magical journey. Then just help me find a wand, she said, her voice flat. She didn't want to spend another second talking to these stinking aristocrats. She wanted her wand, a pile of books, and a quiet corner where she could bury herself in the ocean of knowledge. From this tiny shop, she felt she could see the rigid hierarchy of the entire wizarding world. The only thing she could rely on was her own intelligence. If she didn't waste a single second, maybe, just maybe, she could eventually see the tail lights of these pure-blood elites. Ron, meanwhile, stood there completely oblivious to Hermione's internal monologue. If he, a genuine, British to the bone, pure blood, knew that Hermione thought he was part of some untouchable elite, he wouldn't know whether to feel proud or embarrassed. Kane, sensing the air in the room was becoming as volatile as a gunpowder keg, decided it was time to make a quick exit. Hermione looked like she was one, since you're an orphan, away from a meltdown. But Ollivander wasn't done. He had decided that being allowed to work with living wood and nightmare fuel, materials he had never seen in his long life, was a divine gift. As a craftsman first and a businessman second, charging Kane for the privilege felt wrong. In fact, it felt like he owed Kane. Under the confused gazes of Kane and Harry, the bewildered look from Ron, and Hermione's revolutionary glaring at a landlord stare, Ollivander pressed a small, heavy pouch of gold galleons into Kane's hand. Being able to craft such a masterpiece is its own reward. Don't think less of it, child, Ollivander said, even leaning down to give Kane a brief, emotional hug. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt a chill on the back of my neck, Kane muttered as they stepped out into the street. Like someone was mentally stabbing me. Might be that little witch, Hermione Granger, Hagrid mused. If I'd been treated that differently as a kid, I'd be a bit miffed too. Anyway, never mind that. I need to go to Gringotts. Hagrid, mind coming with me? Kane looked at the gold. He needed 2 gold nuggets for a science machine. Now that he had some capital, he figured he'd buy them directly from the bank. With Hagrid there, the goblins wouldn't try to bully a kid. One quick trip to Gringotts later, the group emerged. Kane's pocket was now 2 gold nuggets heavier, and Ollivander's gold was entirely gone. Oi, I heard someone say Kane gave that stuck-up Malfoy brat a proper thrashing. Is it true? 2 voices spoke in perfect, alternating harmony. Kane turned to see the Weasley twins. You missed out big time, Ron chimed in, recounting the scene with sweeping gestures. Kane's shadow reached out and stuck Malfoy to the ceiling like a bug. Lucius Malfoy himself had to come and apologize to get him down. Mr. Weasley, who had just joined them, looked stunned. Lucius Malfoy apologized to a student. That's a turn-up for the books. After a few more minutes of chatter, the Weasleys headed off, taking Ron with them. Only Kane, Harry, and Hagrid remained in the leaky cauldrons. Courtyard. Hagrid stroked his massive beard. Professor McGonagall mentioned you didn't have the best time with those muggles, Harry. Is that right? Harry shrugged. Depends on how you define it. I wasn't respected, but I wasn't exactly damaged. Well, not more than usual, thanks to Dudley. In that case, I reckon you wouldn't want to go back there before term starts. You can stay here at the leaky cauldron. They do room and board. Harry's eyes lit up with joy, then he immediately thought of his homeless brother who was likely sleeping under a bridge and eating scraps. He had to help. A double room, Harry interjected. Kane's staying too. But Kane has a place to stay, Hagrid said, confused. Probably a bridge or a sewer pipe, Harry insisted, thumping his chest like a protective older brother. I've got the gold now, I'm not letting him suffer out there. Hagrid looked at Kane awkwardly. Kane, for his part, was tired of the grocery store shelf bunk beds at the castle. A real room with real meals. Sign him up. I need to go grab my things before I move in, Kane said. Harry wanted to tell him to leave the rags and buy everything new, like a CEO in one of Aunt Petunia's soap operas, but he figured some things had sentimental value. He simply went upstairs to book the room while Kane went to fetch his belongings. Back at Hogwarts, in Dumbledore's bedroom, Kane was frantically dismantling his campfire. He shoved the stones and charcoal into his pockets, even eyeing the floorboards to see if they were worth prying up. If he suddenly manifested a campfire in the middle of a room at the Leaky Cauldron, would it reinforce Harry's image of him as a destitute runaway? Probably. But between his pride and his survival won every time. In the outer office, Albus Dumbledore pinched the bridge of his crooked nose. He had wanted to spend the next few weeks observing Kane's magic up close, but the boy was moving out the same day he'd arrived. He couldn't exactly blame Hagrid, he hadn't given the giant specific instructions. Kane emerged from the bedroom, looking ready for a journey. Dumbledore offered a thin smile. All packed. Just need to stop by the Forbidden Forest for some wood, Kane replied. Dumbledore's expression faltered. Dealing with tree guards at Hogwarts was easy for the professors, but if Kane brought one of those into Diagon Alley, the local wizards wouldn't know what hit them. I have to stop him, the headmaster thought. What are you doing with all that wood? Kane scratched his head, looking a bit sheepish. Didn't I tell you I'm afraid of the dark? It's for the fire, obviously. Quote. Dumbledore, having pondered the matter all day, had finally pieced together why Kane insisted on a campfire instead of a simple magical light. It was likely the same reason as that evening by the Black Lake, the shadows that attacked him. Just as only magic can defeat magic, perhaps only light imbued with shadow could truly keep the darkness at bay. Kingsley told me that the night you stayed at that motel, there was a surge of dark magic that lasted until dawn. That was this campfire, wasn't it? Dumbledore didn't play guessing games like most people, he asked directly. You've got that one wrong. That was something else, Kane replied. He was thinking of Charlie, who had been hunting him from the constant. Burning his own shadows only ensured Charlie couldn't reach him, but if she wanted to, she could still watch him from the periphery of the light. A campfire, however, was much more effective. I look forward to the day you return to Hogwarts, Dumbledore said, watching Kane leave the office. Leaving the castle, Kane first stopped by the Forbidden Forest to chop a stack of wood, then visited the Black Lake to dig up some stones. Finally, he met Hagrid at his hut, and together they headed back to the Leaky Cauldron. Tom, the bartender, is a good man. If you need anything, ask him. If he can't help, write to Dumbledore, he'll sort it, Hagrid advised, before pulling a cake out from behind him like a magic trick. It's Harry's birthday today. I figured, with that family of his, he's probably never had a real birthday cake. I took the liberty, would you mind giving it to him for me? Hagrid's face was beet red. I'll do it. Kane raised an eyebrow. Well, that's dinner sorted. Kane found the room Harry had booked and tapped the door with the toe of his shoe. Harry opened it quickly, his eyes landing on the cake first. Whoa, is this for me? Why is my name spelled wrong? Harry asked, pleasantly surprised. Ask Hagrid later. Maybe Hogwarts doesn't teach spelling, Kane said, setting the cake on the table. He found his bed and immediately began dumping stones and wood out of his pockets. With a flick of his wand, his shadow swept the materials together, and, whoosh, a blazing fire roared to life in the middle of the floor. This is what you meant. A campfire. Harry stared in shock. Even the cake couldn't distract him from this. What else would it be? Kane looked at Harry, puzzled. What kind of weird stuff is this kid imagining now? I thought your lighting would be, I don't know, a burning oil drum or something. Living off campfires and scavenging, you've had it really rough since you left the Dursleys, haven't you? Harry hesitated, but decided to speak bluntly. He knew he couldn't stay at the Leaky Cauldron forever, eventually, he'd have to go back to Privet Drive. And he didn't want Kane sleeping under bridges. He figured if he spoke some hard truths now, he could convince Kane to come back to the Dursleys with him during the holidays. Sure, the mental abuse was there, but at least there was a roof. Poor Kane, Harry thought. He's been sleeping rough for so long he's developed PTSD. He can't even sleep without a campfire. Kane, oblivious to Harry's internal pity party, was busy throwing things onto the floor. Wood. Move that away from the fire, Harry. If we burn the logs early, we'll have to pay for the room. Stones. Cracking the floorboards costs extra too. 2 gold nuggets. This is enough to cover the damage, but honestly, it's not worth it. Kane sighed at Harry's bewildered face. Just eat your cake. He flicked his wand. Shadows erupted from the tip, swirling the materials into a vortex. In the blink of an eye, a crude, clanking device with leather straps and a lever appeared, a science machine. Huh. Harry's eyes nearly popped out. Wait, mate, when did you learn transfiguration? Kane smirked. This isn't transfiguration. This is handcrafted, from raw materials. Harry opened his mouth, then closed it. Should he say, brilliant? Or, you're full of it? Eventually, he decided that a mature person must tolerate a friend's strange little hobbies. With Harry pacified, another voice checked in. Maxwell, watching through the shadows, stroked his chin. What is the point of making that thing here? To build an alchemical engine, obviously, Kane replied in his mind. I see. And I suppose you'll build that just so you can build a prestidigitator, right? Maxwell said, sounding weary. Smart man, Max. No wonder you were the king of the constant. Kane dismissed Maxwell, ate a slice of cake, brushed his teeth, and got into bed. Wait. Harry sat up. Will the smoke give us carbon monoxide poisoning? Poisoning is a minor risk. But if I don't have this fire, the odds of you waking up next to a skeleton tomorrow are much higher, Kane said, pulling the covers over his head. The next morning. My sanity is dipping again. Probably the wand, Kane muttered, looking at his shadow-bladed wand. He needed a fix. Restoring sanity was simple. Either eat a massive amount of good food, or... I wonder if Diagon Alley sells flower garlands, Kane muttered. He nudged a sleeping Harry. Where's your money? Harry groggily reached into his bedside drawer and pulled out something shiny. Vault key. Go help yourself. Kane took the key and nodded at Harry with deep respect. Now that is a true brother. Gringotts seemed to operate 24/7. Kane was back within half an hour, 5 galleons lighter. After all, he just needed some flowers, he wasn't a monster who'd empty his friend's vault. But as Kane sat at the bar downstairs, wearing a garland of flowers infused with his own shadows to soothe his frayed mind, a serious thought struck him. A grown man sitting in a pub with a flower crown, it looked a bit delicate. Does this look weird to you? Kane asked Tom, who was, as always, wiping a glass. You're young. When you're young, nothing you do is a mistake, Tom comforted him. Good point. Kane hopped off the stool, only to turn around and see a stunned Harry Potter staring at him. Listen, Harry, I can explain. I'm a man's man. It's for science. Harry took 2 slow steps back, hands raised in a defensive gesture. You don't have to explain. Really, you don't. Everyone has their own, unique aesthetic. I totally understand. Ha ha ha. At first, Harry managed to maintain the facade of a serious person, but eventually, the dam broke. He doubled over, laughing so hard he nearly dropped his ice cream. Kane's mouth twitched into a bizarre, semi-smiling, semi-grimacing expression of pure awkwardness. He needed to find out the exact progress of his sanity regeneration as quickly as possible so he could rip this flower crown off his head and bury it in the deepest corner of his trunk. Back in their room, he sat down and scribbled a brief, blunt message on a piece of parchment. I need to learn a spell that lets me clearly see my own status attributes. Teach me. ... He stared at the ink for a moment, feeling it was a bit too cold. After a brief hesitation, he added a line at the end. Yours sincerely, dear Professor Dumbledore. He tied the letter to the leg of his raven and patted its warm back. Fly, raven, go. The raven didn't even twitch. It just stared back at him with a judgmental, beady eye. Did Hagrid buy me a defective model? Kane muttered. Harry, who had just walked back into the room, saw the standoff between boy and bird. Maybe it's because you haven't given it a name. If someone called me, human, and told me to deliver mail, I'd spit in their face. A name. Kane looked at the jet black bird. He thought for a second. Fine. You're Hugin. Now, Hugin, please go deliver this letter, thank you. This time, Hugin spread its wings immediately and flapped out the window, heading toward the distant silhouette of Hogwarts. Hugin. Does that mean I should rename Hedwig to Munin? Harry glanced at Hedwig in her cage. The snowy owl shook her head vigorously and glared at Kane with visible indignation. Your master is the one who suggested it, why are you glaring at me? Kane pouted, feeling unfairly maligned. Dumbledore was a remarkably fast correspondent. By that afternoon, Hugin returned with an envelope clutched in its talons. In the letter, Dumbledore wrote quite a lot. He started by asking why Kane needed such a spell and expressing concern about his health. He explained that since a wizard's power is generally considered unquantifiable, no one had actually invented a status bar charm. However, he did teach him a trick. One could pulse their magic outward and then pull it back in, creating a sort of magical sonar effect. While it wouldn't give precise numerical values, it would allow Kane to perceive the state of his soul, whether it was vibrant and strong or withered and weary. Finally, the headmaster warned him that this technique was notoriously difficult. If he couldn't grasp it, he shouldn't force it. They could go over it in the headmaster's office on the night of the welcoming feast. By the time September 1st rolled around, Kane had mastered the trick. It was actually quite simple once you got the hang of the resonance. Through this method, he could see three distinct states: his physical body, his magic, and his soul. The soul was the clear parallel to his sanity. Whenever he felt his nerves fraying and the shadow creatures lurking, his soul light appeared dim and flickering. Like right now, Kane and Harry had finally found an empty compartment on the Hogwarts Express. The moment Kane hit the seat, he slapped the flower crown onto his head and shoved 2 squares of chocolate into his mouth. Over the last few weeks, if Kane wasn't reading magic books in the Leaky Cauldron, he was reading them on benches in Diagon Alley. Consequently, because of the mental strain of learning new spells, his sanity had never once been full. I need to upgrade my technology as soon as possible, Kane muttered, turning a page. Otherwise, with the intensity of Hogwarts curriculum, I'll be chased across the castle by shadow creatures by lunchtime on the first day. Knock, knock, knock. Harry slid the door open. The person standing there was a familiar face. Harry, Ron said excitedly. Ron. Harry grinned, hugging his friend before pulling Kane out of his book. Kane, look who's here. I don't care whose. Kane looked up. Ron. He shifted gears instantly, shouting with simulated enthusiasm. It wasn't that he was actually that excited, but it felt polite and fit the atmosphere. Ron kept the energy up. Kane, what the bloody hell is that on your head? Quote. A decorative accessory. Don't worry about it. The small compartment now had a third member, but it didn't slow Kane's reading. He remained an island of academic intensity in a sea of Harry and Ron's bored chatter. Well, they did interrupt him eventually. Kane, which house are you aiming for? Ron asked. You know about the 4 houses, right? I know. To be honest, they all seem much the same to me, Kane said, turning a page. How can they be the same? Ron shook his head. Gryffindor is for the brave, Slytherin for the pure bloods, Ravenclaw for the geniuses. You have to find the one that fits you best. They all just sound like different ways of excluding people, Kane said, finally closing his book. I don't really care. Even if I'd personally dug up the graves of a house's ancestors, I don't think they could do much to me. But if I have to choose. He looked at his 2 friends. I'll go where you guys go. This is a boarding school, after all. If I'm not in the same dorm as my friends, there'll be no one to talk to after class. It'd be too lonely. Thinking of the crushing, absolute loneliness he'd felt in the constant made his skin crawl. In a school like this, if you didn't have friends, there was no motivation to do anything. You wouldn't want to go back to the dorm, wouldn't want to go to the Great Hall, just a ghost in the corridors. Then we should all go to Gryffindor. I bet we can all make it. Ron said earnestly. Do we get to choose? Harry asked. Maybe a test. Or something else. I'm not really sure. Ron's face fell slightly. What if the entrance exam was too hard? What if the house didn't want him? Knock, knock, knock. Come in, Kane said, reopening his book. I'm looking for a toad. "Oh, it's you. Remember me, Hermione Granger." Hermione opened the door and immediately recognized the wizarding elite from Ollivanders. She froze. Wait, what is he doing? The boy with a lineage so prestigious that the country's only wand maker paid him to take a custom wand, was sitting on a train with massive dark circles under his eyes, buried in a textbook. And what was she doing? Helping someone find a toad. The saying was true, those better than you are also working harder than you. Hermione, you fool, she thought. How could you waste time looking for a stupid toad when the elite are already studying for midterms? To the others in the compartment, Hermione seemed to freeze for a moment upon seeing Kane. Then, as if some deep-seated logic had been triggered, she entered a state of absolute focus. "Do you mind if I stay?" she asked with a calm, businesslike expression. "Not at all," Ron said, sliding over to make room. Hermione sat down, pulled a thick book from her bag, and immediately began reading. Harry and Ron exchanged a bewildered look. They felt like they were in the wrong seats. They probably should have swapped with the Scholar King across from them so they could huddle together and whisper in peace. However, unlike Kane, who was currently burying his face in his textbook, Hermione still had a task weighing on her mind. Improving her knowledge was urgent, but her promise to help Neville find his toad was equally important. "Have any of you seen a toad?" "A toad named Trevor." The moment the word toad left her mouth, Kane, who had been reading peacefully, jolted upright. His wand was out in a flash. "Toad? Where? Is it an evil toad?" The other three stared at him, their eyebrows twitching in unison. "So, you're afraid of toads? Actually, there isn't one here. We're just looking for it," Harry added quickly. Kane coughed awkwardly and retracted his wand. "Don't mind me. Just a bit of PTSD." Harry and Ron didn't quite understand the term, but Hermione, well-read as always, was different. "I know PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Like being afraid of cars after an accident or loud noises after a war. But what on earth could a toad have done to you to make you?" She gestured toward the shadow blade wand tucked in his sleeve, the one with the golden studs pinning the handle's mouth shut. "React like that." Ron nodded. "I mean, they're ugly, sure, but with your skills, couldn't you just blast it?" Kane slowly closed his book. "You really want to know?" Three heads nodded in perfect synchronization. "Where I used to live was a strange, nonsensical place. It was a wilderness with bizarre magical creatures and peculiar weather patterns. One of those patterns happened in the spring. In the afternoons, the sky would suddenly darken, and it would rain frogs. The locals called it a frog rain. Hundreds of them would fall from the sky at once, and they acted like wilderness bullies. Anything that moved in front of them would get a disgusting lick from their long, sticky tongues." Harry and Hermione didn't doubt a word of it. Having lived in the Muggle world, they were prepared to accept any level of magical strangeness. Ron, however, having grown up in the wizarding world, and Draco Malfoy, who was currently eavesdropping outside the door, were skeptical. Their worldview contained no such place, unless you counted the stories about Innsmouth. The moment Malfoy let out an involuntary gasp of "impossible," the compartment fell silent. Hermione pulled the door open. "And you are?" Malfoy saw Hermione's Muggle-style clothing and almost spat out mudblood, but then he remembered that neither he nor his father had managed to trace Kane's lineage yet. On paper, Kane was technically a Muggle born too. "Focus, Draco," he told himself. "Father said to make friends. My father told me my behavior at the ice cream shop was beneath me. He told me to apologize," Malfoy said, sounding as though the words were being pulled out of him with pliers. He fished 3 beautifully wrapped chocolates from his pocket. "Willy Wonka's chocolate. My father went to great lengths to acquire these. For you." Malfoy placed the 3 bars on the table, resumed his characteristic look of arrogant superiority, and slid the door shut. This was exactly what Lucius had taught him. Don't overdo it, just establish a positive opening. As he walked away, Draco made a mental note of the frog rain wilderness. "That's a lead. It must be the territory of some obscure, high-level magical family. I have to tell father." "Willy Wonka. What a strange name," Hermione muttered. Her eyes and hands remained glued to her book. Since the chocolate wasn't for her, she figured it was best not to look. Willy Wonka was the greatest confectioner in the wizarding world last century, Ron explained, eyes wide. Chocolate frogs, cockroach clusters, lemon sherbets, almost every magical sweet you see in Diagon Alley was his invention. But then his factory was apparently sabotaged by a business rival. He got discouraged, sold off his patents, and now he only runs a tiny workshop. He only makes 100 bars a year. Considering Malfoy's apology is this sincere, I think I can forgive him. Ron ripped the wrapper off his bar and started gnawing immediately. Harry did the same. You couldn't expect an 11-year-old to share something this rare with someone he'd just met. If it were ordinary chocolate, maybe, but this was Wonka's. Kane, meanwhile, simply ate his chocolate. There was no cliché drama where he offered half to Hermione, causing her to blush and sparking a whirlwind romance. He just ate it. In that tiny compartment, 3 boys were synchronized in their chocolate eating, while one girl buried her head in her studies. Those more talented than you are eating high-tier chocolate, now is the time to catch up. She thought fiercely. As Kane finished the last bite, he felt a surge of vitality. His withered soul felt replenished, his sanity had never been this full. He reached up to remove the flower garland. As he did, Hermione, who had been observing him over the top of her book, finally spotted the accessory. So, never mind. Everyone has their own aesthetic. And the garland actually looks quite nice on you. Unlike Hermione's calm tone, the other 2 boys lost it again. They didn't want to be rude, so they ducked their heads, their shoulders shaking violently with suppressed laughter. Kane's temple throbbed. By evening, Hermione finally put her book down to go find Neville's toad. Kane, after a whole morning of reading followed by a whole afternoon of napping, was finally nudged awake by Harry. Get your robes on, Kane. We're at the station. We're about to see Hogwarts. Kane glanced at his wizarding robes, ignoring Harry's lingering awkwardness from the flower garland incident. As they stepped off the train, they saw Hagrid holding a lantern high, calling out to the huddle of shivering first-years. Hey, Kane, Harry, Ron. Get over to the boats, we'll be setting off in a moment. Hagrid waved them toward the shore before disappearing back into the crowd of students. In the small boat, Harry and Ron stared in awe at the silhouette of Hogwarts, its windows glowing like amber jewels against the dark sky. They eventually turned to look at Kane, who sat there as steady as an old dog. How are you not even a little bit surprised? Ron asked. I've had my moment of shock, Kane explained simply. What was he supposed to say? Oh, I already did the VIP one-day tour and slept in the headmaster's quarters. If Harry knew Kane had been living in luxury while he was suffering at the Dursleys, their friendship might survive, but Kane could kiss, living off Harry's vault, goodbye. A 4th student climbed into their boat, a boy who looked a bit wooden and dazed, clearly possessing a heart of gold but zero survival instincts. It was a familiar face. Neville looks like he's far too easy to bully, and I have to go with the girls' boat, so I've put him with you, Hermione said, her voice a rapid-fire blur as she stood on the dock. You won't bully him, will you? Kane shrugged. What kind of monsters do you take us for? Good. Neville, try to get along with your new friends. Hermione called back as she hurried away. Ron, being a pure blood, naturally knew the boy. I didn't know you had an older sister in the Muggle world, Neville, he teased. Neville's face turned beet red. Hermione isn't my sister, she's just a friend. She's very nice. Yeah, Neville, I remember you now, Harry added. We heard she was helping you find your toad. Did you ever find it? No, Neville said, his voice dropping an octave in sadness. I know the feeling, Ron consoled him. I've got my new owl now, but I still keep my old rat, Scabbers. I hope you find that toad soon. Once the boats crossed the Black Lake and they entered the entrance hall, Kane moved with practiced ease. He tapped a specific spot on the wall with the toe of his boot, and a section of stone rippled, forming a small bench. Whoa, how did you know the castle could do that? Ron stared. Kane looked less like a first year and more like a ghost who had haunted the halls for decades. Read more, talk less. Most of the walls in Hogwarts have hidden features like this, Kane lied smoothly, sitting down. The three of them sat in the corner, a shared tension rising in their chests about the upcoming sorting ceremony. Kane, however, felt a pang of regret. I spent all that time with Dumbledore and forgot to ask how the sorting actually works. Sitting on a gold mine and I didn't even pick up a shovel, typical. Suddenly, a commotion broke out across the hall. What's happening? Harry stood up to look. It's Neville's toad. It somehow ended up on the head of another student. Now, that kid is telling Neville to choose, either kill the toad, or get thrashed. Poor Neville. That's a hard choice for him, Ron sighed. Actually, it's not hard at all. Neville will always choose to protect his toad. Kane's ears perked up. No matter the world, human conflict was always the best entertainment. He grabbed Harry and Ron by the sleeves. Let's go watch. Kane, be serious. We know Neville. Harry protested. I am being serious. I'm going to protect him. If it's just a symbolic shove, fine, but if the guy goes too far. Kane led them to a prime front row seat for the drama. Neville was already in his professional defensive crouch, curled into a ball on the floor, protecting his head. A boy with chestnut hair, looking disgusted by the toad that had just touched his face, was looming over him, delivering a series of kicks and punches. That's Bolin Arella, Ron whispered. From a fairly prominent pure-blood family. The fight wasn't particularly dangerous, 11-year-olds don't hit very hard, and Neville's defensive posture was solid. But Hermione, having just arrived, wasn't having it. She whipped out her wand. Stop it. Or don't blame me for being unkind. Arella slowed down, looking at her. And who are you? Hermione Granger, Neville's friend, she declared, her small face set in a mask of stern justice. Granger. Arella glanced upward, searching his mental directory of wizarding surnames. Finding nothing, he sneered. Listen, you little mudblood, you should turn around and walk away before I decide to give you a thrashing too. The word, mudblood, hit the hall like a physical blow. The room fractured, shock and anger from one side, cheers and snickering from the Slytherin-leaning crowd, and total confusion from Harry and Kane. Ron's face went purple. He started rolling up his sleeves and reaching for his wand, but Harry and Kane held him back. Before they could ask what the word meant, Hermione acted. With the zero-frame startup of a natural-born prodigy, she cast a spell that turned Arella's soft robes into a suit of rigid, immobile steel. Ron calmed down instantly. Okay, Hermione's got this. So, what does mudblood mean exactly? Harry whispered. It's a foul slur for Muggle-borns, Ron hissed. It's about 100 times worse than the worst thing you can say in the Muggle world. Kane scratched his head. Wait, so does that apply to me? I mean, your magic is too weird for a Muggle-born, but a guy like that isn't using logic, Ron whispered. He and Harry moved slightly closer to Kane, flanking him, just in case Kane decided to stick the guy to the ceiling again. Across the room, Arella's necklace glowed, a constant finite incantatem charm that broke Hermione's spell. As his robe softened, he raised his wand to retaliate. Suddenly, Maxwell appeared behind Kane, his spectral form visible only to him. I believe I've figured out what this show is really about, Kane, Maxwell murmured. This is part of your sorting ceremony.